Chapter 1. She smelled blood. Blair Mason strode out of the elevator and into the marble-lined ballroom lobby of one of the Spire Casino's tall towers. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a bird's-eye view of nighttime Las Vegas far below. Jammed-up traffic filled the strip. Garish lights blinked on all the casinos, amplified by Christmas decorations as the casinos tried to outdo each other with their festive spirit. There were even lights on the large cranes that arched into the sky from the construction site next door. The Spire was one of the newest casinos, made up of 4 tall glass spires all linked by glass bridges at different levels. It made her think of some fantasy palace. Blair loved living in Vegas. She loved the vibrant, slightly crazy energy of the city. But the glitz hid a darker side as well. To one side of the lobby stood an impressive suit of Japanese samurai armor. Her gaze ran over it hungrily. This armor was old and exquisite, with iron scales and an elaborate helmet. There was a huge banner on the wall behind it proclaiming the name of the exhibition in bold red letters: Soul of the Samurai. To the other side of the space, a group of men and one woman were huddled, talking. Everything about them screamed cops, from their black shoes to their button-down shirts. But no one screamed it more than the man who followed her out of the elevator. She felt him, like a low-level hum of electricity against her skin. He paused beside her, and despite the fact that Blair was tall for a woman at 5'9", he towered over her. He had broad shoulders and messy brown hair threaded with the odd strand of gold. His dark jeans hugged long, long legs, and he had a shiny badge attached to his belt. Detective Luke McCade, Las Vegas Metropolitan Police. A man who regularly set her teeth on edge and made her blood boil. She shifted her high-tech CXM-7 rifle on her shoulder and watched the rest of her team, more tall, muscled men and one other woman, exit the elevator. Team 52. As always, she felt a quiet sense of pride to be a part of this team. They were some of the best people she'd ever fought with. They saved lives and made a difference. At the front of the group was their leader and Blair's best friend, Lachlan Hunter. He scanned the room with his flat gold eyes, taking it all in. Beside him stood Smith Creed. The big man was cradling his rifle and scowling. Lean, good-looking Seth Lynch was next, followed by sexy Axel Diaz and dark-haired Callie Kimura. Callie caught Blair's gaze and hefted her medical kit up on her shoulder. The medic's face, which was stamped with her Hawaiian heritage, looked unhappy. Callie hated when anyone was hurt. They were all in their civilian clothes because they'd been enjoying a night off at their favorite bar until McCade had tracked them down.
This way.
McCade's voice was a deep, confident rumble. Of course it came out sounding like an order. Blair followed him, scowling at his back. You actually going to tell us anything, McCade? Walking in blind is always a freaking bad idea. McCade was Team 52's contact at the LVMPD. And since Blair was the team's second-in-command, it fell to her to liaise with him. The liaising usually devolved into arguments. Team 52 was a covert Black Ops group, tasked with securing and safeguarding ancient artifacts. What most of the world didn't know was that human civilization had been a lot more advanced than most historians believed. At the end of the last ice age, those civilizations had been wiped out by flooding. But every now and then, pieces of powerful ancient technology popped up. In the wrong hands, they could do a lot of damage. Not surprisingly, bad guys often wanted these artifacts. It was Blair's job, along with the rest of her team, to stop them. The artifacts ended up out in the secure warehouse at their base, Area 52, hidden in the Nevada desert. A smile briefly curved her lips. She was good at her job. As a Marine, she'd made a difference, but as part of Team 52, she rocked at bringing down assholes intent on hurting others. But but sometimes that meant the fight got messy and McCade was generally tasked with the cleanup. He made no effort to hide the fact that he disliked it. McCade paused and swiveled. Brown eyes hit hers and she felt the impact like an electric shock. Her fingers tightened on her rifle. She hated the impact this man had on her and she did her damnedest not to show it. He glared at her.
You'll be briefed.
She tilted her head. This century?
Blair.
Lachlan's tone held a thread of warning.
Samurai exhibit.
McCade nodded at the banner.
Officially opens tomorrow, but tonight was a VIP opening night party with a small group of selected guests. Someone locked the doors, and then screams were heard.
Blair's jaw locked. Not good.
First cops on scene managed to get in. They never came back out.
Really not good. Why'd you come and get us?
You'll see.
McCade swiveled, his boots clicking on the tiles as he headed for the cops.
Status?
One older man lifted his head, rubbing the back of his neck. He wore a rumpled beige shirt over the start of a belly and had thinning brown hair.
Shit, McCade. We got access to the first exhibit room.
The man released a breath, his curious gaze skating over Blair and the rest of her team. Then he straightened.
Everyone was slaughtered. All the VIP guests, security guards, the first cops on the scene.
Shit. Blair shared a look with Lachlan. A muscle ticked in McCade's jaw. His focused gaze moved to the closed double doors.
Where are the perps now, Baxter? Well, we looked at some security footage. Looks like there is only one perp.
Double shit. One person had killed a room full of people. Blair eyed McCade. That was why he'd called in Team 52.
Looks like the perp came in as a guest for the VIP preview of the exhibit.
Baxter continued.
Where is he now?
Lachlan asked.
He's crossed over to the second exhibit room.
The older detective glanced at Team 52.
It's over in the neighboring tower. There's a damn glass bridge linking the two buildings.
Blair shifted her feet. Her hands itched to grab her CXM and get in there. The female cop stepped forward. She had her chestnut brown hair pulled back into a no-nonsense braid. She looked about 10 years older than Blair's 33. SWAT went in, the woman said.
What?
McCade barked.
I told you to stall them.
We tried, once they saw the dead in there. The woman jerked a thumb at the closed doors. They refused to wait. They wanted in.
We need to move,
Blair said.
Now. Who are these guys?
The third cop, a younger, compact man with brown skin and black hair, asked, staring at Lachlan and the others. McCade didn't answer. Instead, he spun on his heels and strode toward the double doors. He threw them open and the scent of blood hit them all in the face. Blair stepped inside, her chest hitching. Blood splattered the walls, ran over the tiled floor, and dripped off several glass exhibit displays.
Fuck,
Lachlan muttered.
Madre de Dios.
That voice was Axel. Blair took in the samurai armor, swords resting on racks, displays of old scrolls. Most of the items were safe behind tempered glass. There were more black and red banners and large red lights hanging from the ceiling. McCade moved farther into the space and they followed, their boots echoing in the silent room. Then Blair spotted the first bodies. So much blood. Fuck, what a mess. Her gaze took in several bodies lying face down, arms outstretched, and her stomach rolled. They'd all been sliced up, and blood was forming significant puddles on the tiles. She stared at the blood, old memories stirring. No, you fucking don't. Rounding a large display case, they saw the bodies of two uniformed cops, one man and one woman, sprawled on the floor. The man had been beheaded.
Fuck me,
Axel murmured. He stood right behind Blair, and she saw horror in his velvet dark eyes before he hid it. He was a former Delta Force soldier, so he'd seen a lot of bad shit. But this was really bad shit. At the end of the long room was a display up on a raised dais. It was a tiered wooden rack, clearly used for holding swords. There was one resting at the bottom of the rack, but 3 were missing. Blair moved closer, sidestepping some blood splatter, staring at the empty spaces. A discreet tag sat beside the display. Katanas by Master Swordmaker Muramasa. She glanced up and spotted McCade standing beside the dead cops, his hands on his hips. His jaw was clenched so tight she thought it would shatter. She felt emotion pumping off him. "Want to step out?" Blair asked quietly. He lifted his head, his brown gaze hot and angry. "No." She shrugged. "I was just—" "You aren't even affected by this, are you?" She pressed her tongue to her teeth. She knew he was pissed, and she was a convenient target. "I've seen a lot of shit, McCade. I can't afford to lose it, or more people might die." Suddenly, screams and shouts echoed through the room. They all turned, glancing toward the arched doorway that led to the glass bridge connecting the spires. Lachlan rocketed past Blair, and she broke into a run. The rest of the team and McCade were right behind them. The floor of the bridge was made entirely of glass. Blair wasn't afraid of heights, but as she jogged across it, her stomach rolled. "The SWAT team needs help," McCade said. She focused on the closed door ahead. The sound of gunfire and frenzied shouts penetrated the closed entry. They needed to get into the second exhibit room. Lachlan rattled the door, his face darkening. "Locked and barricaded." "Shit," Seth murmured from behind her. "They're being massacred." The sound of running steps echoed behind them. All of Team 52 swiveled, lifting their rifles. Baxter and the other cops stumbled to a halt, their faces going pale. Who the hell can take on an entire SWAT team alone? The female cop's voice was shaky. Lachlan shifted. "Get us in there, McCade." Blair gripped her CXM tighter, aiming it at the door. "Now." "Okay, who the hell are these guys?" The younger cop bit out. "We're the people who are going to stop this," Blair said. The cop eyed her for a second, then her high-tech rifle, and finally he nodded. McCade checked the door again. "We'll have to knock it down." Blair eyed him. "You and your guys should stay back." "Hell no, I'm coming with you." She shrugged. "Suit yourself." She'd make sure she kept an eye on him. He was on their side, mostly, and Team 52 would have more shit to deal with if he wasn't around. He was absolutely a pain in her ass, but then again, even she had to admit he was a good-looking pain in her ass. "Shit, don't go there, Blair." Lachlan stepped to the side. "Smith." The big man strode forward, lifted a boot, and kicked the doors open. Detective Luke McCade followed Team 52 through the broken door and into the second exhibit room. He had his Glock in his hand and aimed. He watched the team shift from alert to battle-ready. They moved together with the ease of a group who worked, trained, and fought together every day. He knew they were badass and could handle themselves. Against his will, his gaze went to Blair. Especially the former Special Forces Marine and the woman who knew how to ignite his temper like no one else could. Hell, she just had to arch an eyebrow and it could make him mad. Her blonde ponytail swung behind her. She was in jeans, simple white shirt, and a black leather jacket. As she looked around, light glinted off her left eye. That eye was silver while her other was blue. He'd never seen a prosthetic like it before. She was pure power, competence, and focused intensity. The gunfire had stopped, and he scanned the quiet room, taking in the priceless samurai artifacts in the deafening silence. "Damn." It was Baxter's voice from the doorway. Damn didn't quite cut it. A dead SWAT officer lay on the floor just ahead of him. The man's face had been slashed and blood soaked his dark uniform. Lachlan lifted a hand and gave a signal. As one, Team 52 moved forward. More bodies clad in dark green SWAT uniforms, and more blood. Shit. Luke's pulse jumped. Whoever had done this had taken down the entire SWAT team. Suddenly, one man groaned. Luke dropped down beside him, pressing a finger to the man's bloody neck. He felt a faint pulse.
Baxter, get this man out of here. He needs medical help.
The other cop lifted his radio. We need paramedics, now.
Rivera, help me move him out of the way. Clemens, stop that bleeding.
Baxter and Rivera carefully shifted the man off to the side while Clements tried to stem the flow of blood from the injured man's wounds. Ahead, Team 52 fanned out.
Anyone see him?
Lachlan asked. Nope, Seth responded. Blair stood in the center of the room, turning slowly. Then she went still, staring off behind two large displays of armor. Over there. Her team turned, their high-tech rifles aimed. Luke swiveled and he caught movement at the back of the room. A figure burst out from behind a display. Shit. The man wasn't very tall and had a slim build. He looked like a damn accountant. Neatly cut hair framed an ordinary face. He wore a wrinkled suit that was splattered with blood. He was also holding a Japanese katana. The man raced at Lachlan and Blair with a roar. Even from a distance, Luke could see that the man's eyes were red and bloodshot. He looked like he was hyped up on drugs. As the sword sliced through the air, Lachlan dodged to the side. Blair ducked. Team 52 opened fire. As the bullets hit the man, his body jerked. But they didn't slow him down. He swung the sword again. No effect, Blair said calmly. The attacker spun and rushed at her. Luke's heart thudded. He aimed his Glock, firing. But it was like tossing spitballs at a charging rhino. Blair moved backward and whipped her CXM up like a sword. The katana hit her weapon with a clang. She and the man danced across the room, trading blows. But her face was showing the strain. She blocked another hit, her arms shaking.
Blair?
Lachlan said. He has increased strength. The words were pushed out between gritted teeth.
Acknowledged,
Lachlan said.
It has to be the sword.
Think so, she said. Luke frowned. He knew in vague general terms what Team 52 did, but as he stared at the silver sword and the perp, who should have been laid out by the number of bullets sent his way, Luke's brain was having difficulty understanding just what he was seeing. Suddenly Seth and Axel stepped forward, the men going down on their knees. They rolled several small devices across the tiled floor. The small metal balls bumped over the tiles, then exploded. An amber fluid pooled on the floor. Blair saw it and angled in that direction. As she neared, she leaped over the goo. The attacker stepped right in it, and couldn't lift his feet. He growled, slashing out with the katana and trying to lift his shoes. With a roar, he jerked one leg up, his face going red from the strain. He turned just as Blair swung her rifle like a bat. It collided with the man's head. He let out another enraged roar, shaking his head. He tore his other foot free and charged at Blair, face twisted like a demon. Hell. Luke moved closer, but he knew his damn handgun was useless. He hated feeling helpless. As the deadly sword arced through the air, he watched Blair bend backward. The blade passed over her. With the next swing, she jumped back. But the very tip of the sword touched her bicep, leaving a line of blood on her skin. She lifted her chin. You've made me really mad now, asshole. As the sword whirled again, she dodged and dropped to her knees. She rammed a punch into the attacker's gut. The man doubled over, air rushing out of him. Blair leaped to her feet. Time to end this, motherfucker. She kneed him in the face, then struck his arm with a brutal, powerful kick. She moved with complete control of her body. Luke sucked in a breath. She was a sight to watch. The man cried out and dropped the sword. The katana clattered on the tiles. She kicked his other arm, the sound of snapping bone clear. She lifted her fists, dropping into a fighting stance, and smiled. The man snarled. He rushed at her and she kicked and punched him. The man tried to fight back, but she ducked his sloppy swings. He was getting slower and slower. Blair was relentless, power and strength. Luke couldn't drag his gaze off her. "Come on," she said. "You will not be hurting anyone else. Ever." With a vicious front kick, she sent the man flying into a display. Glass shattered. He didn't get up. Luke strode forward. The man was sprawled on his back and not moving.
"Seth, restraints,"
Lachlan said.
"Callie, check him."
The pair moved closer to the man and Callie leaned down to assess his wounds. Seth was already restraining the man's hands. Luke was staring at Blair. She was breathing heavily, still in a fighting stance. She rose and tossed her blonde ponytail over her shoulder. Their gazes locked and Luke felt like he'd been hit by a live wire. Pure electric heat. He suddenly realized he was as hard as a rock. Damn it. Blair Mason wasn't how he liked his women. She wasn't soft or easy or pleasant. She was tough, violent, and abrasive. But right now, watching her fight, seeing her strength, it rocked him to the core. He wanted her. Under him, over him, spread for him. He shook his head hard. Now was not the time to be thinking with his dick. "Fuck me." The quiet murmur was Baxter's voice. Luke looked over and saw his detectives looking up from where they were clustered around the injured SWAT team member. They were all staring at Blair with awe. Rivera wiped a fist across his mouth. "That woman is
"Badass,"
Luke answered. "I'd consider leaving my husband for her," Clemens murmured. Luke shook his head again and forced himself to look at the downed attacker. Callie lifted her head and gave one shake. "He's dead." "Shit," Blair said. "You didn't kill him," Callie said. "The bullets did. They clearly had no effect at first, but once he dropped the sword, he had no hope. His insides were shredded."
"What the hell is going on?"
Baxter demanded.
"How can a man function while he's filled with bullets?"
Lachlan looked at Luke and raised a brow. Luke turned to his detectives.
"Baxter, you, Clements, and Rivera work with casino security and the paramedics. Organize for the bodies to be bagged."
His people hesitated. Baxter looked belligerent and Clements looked like she wanted to argue. But they finally nodded and left.
"What are we dealing with?"
Luke asked. Lachlan shook his head.
"No idea, but whatever it is, it isn't good."
Blair shifted, her gaze scanning around the room, especially since there are 2 swords missing. Luke felt a gnawing in his gut. He knew the feeling. He'd first felt it when he discovered the body of his murdered mother as a teen. It was the one telling him that things were going to get a lot worse before they got any better. Chapter 2. Blair leaned against the wall, studying the body of the dead guy as they loaded him onto a gurney. McCade's detectives had identified him. Turned out the guy was a financial auditor. She took in his slim build and lack of musculature. He certainly didn't look capable of taking down an entire well-trained SWAT team. Something about the sword had given him strength and triggered him to do this. They were back in the first exhibit room. Lachlan and Seth were circling the space, still searching for the missing swords. Smith and Axel were standing guard at the doors and Callie was packing up her medical kit. McCade stepped in front of Blair.
"You're going to bleed to death."
He pressed a cloth to her arm. "It's just a nick."
"Pretty sure you could have an arm amputated and you'd say it was just a nick."
"I'm not an idiot, McCade." He grunted and waved a paramedic over. Blair gritted her teeth. Don't argue with him. Don't argue with him. An older woman in a paramedic uniform appeared and pulled the cloth away. Need stitches. Well, fuck. Blair wrinkled her nose. Sit, the woman ordered. Bad-temperedly, Blair moved over and sat down on a small bench. She guessed the exhibit organizers had sprinkled the room with these benches so the guests could sit and marvel at the beauty of the samurai artifacts. No one would be marveling in here after tonight. The paramedic knelt beside her and started work. She jabbed a syringe into Blair's arm and Blair winced. Then, when she saw the woman lift a needle, her stomach did a queasy roll. Injections she didn't mind. Stitches? Hell no. McCade was still standing in front of her. God, she was eye level with his crotch. The man certainly filled out his jeans. She felt a shot of desire flash through her system. Shit, maybe she'd lost more blood than she thought. There was no way in hell she should be thinking about Luke McCade's package. The paramedic started stitching and bile rose in Blair's throat. McCade crouched. You just took down a homicidal maniac, but stitches make your face turn white? Don't say stitches. She waved a finger at him. She expected to see amusement on his rugged face, but his warm brown eyes just studied her. So, 2 swords are missing, he said. Blair latched on to the distraction. Yeah, which is not good. And those last 2 words are in uppercase letters and underlined. Any chance the other swords aren't like the one this guy used? They looked over to where Lachlan was holding the sword in question. He had it wrapped in a thick cloth, and she knew its next stop would be a containment box before they flew it back to Area 52. Probably not. McCade ran a hand through his hair. Shit. Figured as much. We have to find them, McCade. Soon. He nodded. We'll send the one we have back to... Blair eyed the paramedic working on her arm. Base. Ty can hopefully shed some light on exactly what we're dealing with. Dr. Ty Sampson was a former DARPA scientist and genius inventor. If anyone could work it out, it was him. McCade ran his hand through his hair again. I've already got my people checking with local dealers who trade antiquities and antique weapons. Whoever took them isn't going to sell them. Blair looked down at her arm and watched the needle move into her skin. Bile rose in her throat. Ugh. McCade's hand gripped her knee. Blair. What? She snapped. She hated that he saw her weakness. Focus on me. Generally focusing on you pisses me off. His lips quirked. Better that than you vomiting or passing out. She hissed. That is never going to happen. Sure thing, Cupcake. Her eyes bugged open. Cupcake? Heard you have a weakness for cupcakes. Now her eyes narrowed. How the hell do you know that? He leaned closer, his voice dropping. She got a whiff of his cologne, something woody and citrusy and too damn delicious. I'm a detective, remember? A man rushed through the doors. He was older, well-dressed, with a set of round glasses perched on his nose, his near-white hair cut stylishly. Oh my God! He stumbled to a halt, looking at the blood smeared on the floor. He pressed a fist to his mouth. Exhibition curator, McCade murmured. Quillen. The curator's gaze landed on the sword rack at the end of the room. Oh no! He took a few stumbling steps. No, no, no! All finished. The paramedic patted Blair's arm. Only needed 3 stitches. You were a very good girl. Blair scowled at the woman. If you expect me to thank you... The paramedic smiled and closed her bag. Let's find out what this guy knows about the swords, McCade said. Blair nodded. Mr. Quillen, I'm Detective McCade, Las Vegas Metropolitan Police. I'd like to ask you some questions. The man visibly pulled himself together. Yes, of course. This is terrible. Where are the swords from? McCade asked.
Japan, obviously. They were found in a private collection, a deceased estate. They were previously thought lost.
Quillen pushed his glasses up.
They were crafted by one of Japan's most infamous swordsmiths, Muramasa. He founded the Muramasa school during the Muromachi period. That was during the 15th century in Kuwana, Japan.
So they've been locked away all this time until whoever owned them died, Blair murmured. Quillen nodded.
It was a coup to have them here.
He pressed a hand to his stomach.
This is so terrible. Those swords are priceless and now they're missing. My employers are going to be very, very unhappy.
The man was more worried about the swords than the dead people. Blair glared at him and he eyed her, straightening as though he thought she might hit him.
Mr. Quillen, people died here tonight.
McCade bit out.
Right.
The curator's face went pale and he swallowed.
Right, I know. I'm sorry.
The swords, Blair said. What else do you know about them?
Like I said, made by Muramasa. He was one of the sword-making legends of Japan.
Quillen waved a hand at the rack.
The swords he made were said to be cursed.
Blair felt a trickle of unease. McCade looked at her and raised a brow. Cursed? She prompted.
Yes. Swords imbued with demonic powers.
The curator gave a forced laugh.
Of course, that's just a myth. Those sorts of things aren't true.
Blair bit her lip. There were lots of ancient artifacts that were said to be cursed. Most were nothing more than a combination of vivid imagination and fantasy. But a few were legitimate pieces of ancient technology.
The Muramasa swords are priceless,
Quillen continued. McCade nodded.
We'll find them. That'll be all for now, Mr. Quillen. I'll be in touch. Thank you, Detective. I hope you find what sparked this terrible event and find the stolen swords.
Lachlan strode over. His gaze caught Blair's and she lifted her chin.
I'm taking the sword in,
Lachlan announced. Blair noticed the now familiar muscle tick in McCade's jaw again. She was starting to find it pretty fascinating.
What?
Quillen spluttered.
You can't.
When Lachlan's cool gold eyes flicked the curator's way, the man's words dried up.
That'll be all, Mr. Quillen,
McCade said again. With an unhappy nod, the man walked away. McCade turned.
I'd prefer to have the damn sword locked up at the station. It'll be safer if we take it,
Lachlan said.
My team will examine it. We could find information that could help us. So could my forensics team.
Blair smiled. He can't stop us. McCade's brown eyes settled on her, anger sparking in them. Okay, she was baiting him, but it felt so damn good. Lachlan shook his head.
Blair, we're all in the same team.
McCade blew out a frustrated breath.
Fine. And she's right, I can't stop you. But we will damn well work together to find the other swords. This is my city, and we have a team of dead cops. I will bring those swords in, and the bastard who stole them to justice.
Lachlan was silent for a moment, then nodded.
Deal. I'm assigning Blair to you.
Blair jerked and spun to face Lachlan.
What?
Her boss and best friend, former best friend, just gave her a look. Damn it, Lachlan knew McCade drove her crazy.
Work together,
Lachlan said.
We need to stop another massacre and get the swords back.
Blair huffed out a breath. Acknowledged. McCade shot her a smile.
Don't worry, I'll go easy on you, Mason. I'm a good boss.
Working together, McCade. I'm not working for you.
Semantics. I'm in charge of this investigation.
She crossed her arms over her chest. I am not taking orders from you.
We'll see.
She wrinkled her nose. Asshole. She stayed silent, but she was pretty sure he read her thought because his smile widened. Luke changed lanes, driving his black Ford Explorer toward police headquarters. Adrenaline from the night's events had worn off, leaving him in dire need of coffee. He was pissed. It was easier to be angry than feel guilt and sadness over the terrible loss of lives. It didn't matter how long he'd been a police officer, every death hurt. Every person he couldn't save ate at him. And it was worse when his fellow cops were taken down doing their duty. God, so many of them. The SWAT team's loss was a huge blow. There were families who'd been destroyed, kids who'd lost a parent. Luke knew in horrible detail the horror of losing a parent and having your family torn apart. His hands flexed on the wheel. He wanted action. He wanted to know who the hell was responsible for this. And he hated handing over the one piece of evidence he had, even if he did know it was for the best. Blair fidgeted in the seat beside him. "You got anything to eat?" He frowned. "It's 4 a.m. and you're hungry?" "Yeah." "No, I don't have anything to eat." She grunted, then reached forward and fiddled with the tuner on his radio. The country and western station changed to rock music. Luke leaned over and changed it back. "I sense you're pissed, McCade," Blair said. "I can feel your anger filling the car. So spit it out." "People are dead. Cops are dead." She sighed. "Yeah, that sucks." He gripped the wheel hard. "I want my people to examine the sword." She leaned back in her seat. "Your people aren't equipped and you know it." She pulled a small package out of the pocket of her jeans and popped a piece of gum in her mouth. "It's why you brought us in the first place." "I know, but I don't have to like it." "I get it," she said. "You're a control freak." Luke gritted his teeth. "I do my job. This is my city, and it's my job to ensure its people are protected." Blair blew a bubble and then popped it. "We'll take care of the sword, McCade. It won't hurt anybody else." His hands flexed on the wheel again. "We need to focus on finding the other 2 swords." He shook his head. "How can a damn sword do so much damage? I don't fucking believe in magic." "It's not magic, McCade. Just good old science and some poor human decisions." She turned to look at him. "This is my job. I do whatever I have to in order to stop these artifacts hurting people." "And you usually leave a trail of destruction behind you." Her eyes fired. "That destruction would be far worse if Team 52 didn't do what we do. You got a taste of that tonight." "You guys are mavericks." She made an enraged noise. "I don't have the luxury of a slow, careful approach, detective." "Being careful and considered doesn't mean slow, Mason." "Sometimes I only have seconds to make life and death decisions." She crossed her arms. "I won't apologize for doing what I have to do in order to save lives." The car filled with a tense silence, and finally they reached headquarters. Years back, the LVMPD had brought together a bunch of bureaus and built the new facility. 3 multi-story buildings formed a U-shape around a parking lot lined with palm trees. The homicide section had a space on one of the floors of the main building. Luke pulled into a parking spot, and by the time he got out of the SUV, Blair was out and glaring at him. "If we hadn't contained the man tonight, he might have torn through the entire Spire casino," Blair said. He stalked up to her. Shit. He saw her point. But damn it, he followed the rules, enforced the law, and more often than not, Blair and her team rode right over the rules. "I know that." Their bodies brushed, and he felt the electric shock of it rush through him. He saw her jolt as well, her eyes narrowing. "I just wish you put some effort into containing the bodies and the chaos when you take down the bad guys." She made an angry sound. Her arm flashed out, her elbow catching him in the gut. He grunted, and when her hand shot out again, he grabbed her. In a fast move, he spun her and rammed her front against the side of his car. He twisted her arm up behind her back. With another furious sound, she tried to fight him, but Luke crowded her with his body, his chest flush against her back. He kept her pinned because he knew exactly what damage she could do if she was loose. "I don't want to hurt you," he murmured against the back of her neck. She snorted. Like you could.
I know you have badass running through your veins, but we both know I could.
She jerked against him. Damn, she smelled good. He breathed in the skin of her neck. Not a perfume, but something she rubbed on her skin.
Now we need to make enough peace to work together.
I'll work with you. I want those damn swords found.
Good. Now admit I have you trapped.
She stiffened. Bite me.
I'm starting to think we might both enjoy that.
She stiffened even more. You get hit in the head when I wasn't looking, McCade? Luke felt his control slipping. Hell, all Blair Mason had to do was breathe and his control was in shreds. In answer, he raked his teeth down the side of her neck. She arched back, her toned ass rubbing against his hardening cock. She made a choked sound, just shy of a groan.
You going to behave now?
He asked. Let me go or I'll break your leg. Her threat made him harder. Shit, he needed his head examined. He stepped back. When her fist flashed out, he was ready, blocking her blow. Blair stepped back, avoiding his gaze. We have some swords to find, so if you're done fucking around. She swiveled and stomped toward the glass front of the station. No, he wasn't done with her. Not by a long shot. Inside, rows of chairs filled the waiting area in front of the large windows where people could come to report and follow up on crimes. Even this early in the morning, it was pretty busy. They passed two khaki-clad uniforms hauling a cuffed man wearing a Hawaiian shirt between them. His greasy hair fell over his face and dark circles underscored his eyes. I don't want no trouble. The man twisted and jerked. I just want to play my slot machines. Yeah, Harry, we know. One uniform murmured. Gonna hit it big on the next one, I know it. Quiet. The cuffed man jerked free and, with a violent shove, sent one officer tumbling over some chairs. Screams broke out and Luke cursed. The escapee barreled through some people moving past Blair. Her foot flashed out. With a shout, the man fell to his knees, and Blair used her palm of her hand to slam his face into an empty chair. The man howled and blood dripped from his nose.
I think he broke his nose,
Luke said. Oops, I didn't mean to. Hawaiian shirt man was tenacious, though, and jumped to his feet. You bitch! He lowered his head and charged at Blair. She sidestepped and landed a hard chop to his arm. Luke heard the bone snap. With another howl, the man fell back into an empty chair, cradling his arm. Blair smiled darkly. I meant that. Luke shook his head just as the officers arrived. Sorry, the older officer said. Thanks for the help.
I think he's going to need medical attention,
Luke said. The younger officer was eyeing Blair cautiously. Shaking his head again, Luke led Blair to the elevators and they stepped inside. Soon they entered the homicide section. Lieutenant Bailey ran the section and Luke liked his boss. The man was a seasoned detective and knew Vegas like the back of his hand. He had 3 groups of detectives who worked homicide. Luke stalked into the large room where his detectives had their desks set up. His team was there, along with the final detective on their team, Moretti. He felt the heavy pall in the air. Everyone was reeling at the loss of officers at the Spire.
Rivera, did you get all the security footage from the Spire?
Luke asked. The trim detective was the youngest member of their team. He stood, eyeing Blair. Yeah, Luke.
I want to view it. Find us a room.
Then Luke stopped and dragged in a breath.
The best way to honor those we've lost is to find those swords and whoever caused this.
His team nodded.
Blair Mason, Detectives Les Baxter, Ben Rivera, Gus Moretti, and Joanna Clements.
Luke said.
Everyone, this is Blair. She's a military consultant who'll be helping with the case.
Military? Baxter said. Blair smiled and crossed her arms over her chest. Yeah. Baxter nodded.
I did a stint in the Marines out of high school.
Oh, yeah? Her smile widened. I was a Marine, too. Baxter smiled. I was infantry. 6th Marine Regiment. Blair sat on the edge of Luke's desk and crossed her legs at the ankles. Force Recon. Baxter's eyes bugged out of his head.
Yeah, Baxter, Luke said. She can kill you with her little finger.
Blair grinned. Actually, I don't need my pinky to do that. You should have seen her at the Spire, Moretti, Clemens said. Sorry, Blair, but you scare the shit out of me. Blair tilted her head. I get that a lot. She pointed at a box of donuts on Clemens' desk. I am thrilled to see you're living up to the police donut cliché because I'm starved. Clemens grinned and shoved the donuts toward Blair. Luke's colleagues moved off to their desks, but his gaze stayed on Blair. He watched her inhale 2 glazed donuts, but his mind was still processing her earlier response. There had been something flat in her voice when she'd responded to Clemens. Okay, room 2 is open, Luke, Rivera called out. Security footage ready for viewing. Luke nodded.
Baxter, did you run that full check on our dead attacker? I want to know when he last went to the dentist and what he liked to eat for breakfast.
Yeah, got it. The older detective held up a folder. Still got info coming in, but I have to say the man is boring with a capital B. Baxter and Rivera headed for the conference room. Blair stood and Luke took a second to lean in, keeping his voice low.
Just so you know, I'm not afraid of you, Blair.
She turned her head, the look on her face unreadable. Maybe you aren't as smart as I thought you were. He smiled.
You think I'm smart?
Her nose wrinkled and she moved to follow the others. Inside the small room, they all sat on uncomfortable chairs around the long table. Moretti and Clemens joined them. They watched a screen attached to the wall and the security footage from the samurai exhibit filled the display. Luke fast-forwarded through the footage until the guests for the VIP viewing started filtering in. They saw the slender auditor enter and start wandering through the exhibit. He looked relaxed and interested. Just a man out for an enjoyable evening. He's just a guest, Rivera said. Yeah, he didn't look like he was there to steal swords or start a massacre. Luke flipped open the folder Baxter had handed him. His name is Byron Fuller, Baxter said. He's an auditor with a local financial firm. Born and raised in Vegas, no criminal record. They kept watching, and then Luke spotted a figure in black enter the room. The man was very tall, wide-shouldered, and wore a hood that obscured his face. Luke straightened. Hello, Blair murmured. They watched as the man headed straight towards the katana display at the end of the room. While no one was watching, he stepped closer and lifted the top sword off the rack. He knows where the cameras are, Blair said. He's not giving us a look at his face.
And he went straight to those swords, Luke said.
All of a sudden, one of the guests turned around, spotted the man, and pointed. Several more guests turned, and Byron Fuller stepped forward. The leaner man was frowning as he confronted the thief. Even without sound, it was clear to see Byron was arguing with the hooded figure. Then Byron reached out and grabbed the sword. And Luke watched as Byron jolted, the man's hands flexing on the hilt of the katana. Oh, hell, Blair murmured. The room was silent as they watched the horror unfold. Byron Fuller turned, raised the katana, and exploded into some sort of berserker rage. His face twisted into a terrible mask as he tore through the guests. Luke heard his detectives pull in shocked breaths. He sat there, every muscle in his body strung tight, as they watched the bloodbath. Fuller didn't hesitate with any stroke of the sword. A shuddering breath escaped Luke. Damn it to hell. If we want to find the swords, we have to find the man in the hood, Blair said. She hadn't watched the massacre. Instead, she'd been watching the man in black. Luke saw the man as he disappeared behind some exhibits with 2 katanas in his arms. He set that up. Blair crossed her arms over her chest. He let Fuller take the sword and used him as a distraction. Baxter frowned. But why did Fuller attack? Luke lifted a hand and rubbed his tired eyes. All right, I want everyone running searches. Baxter, contact local antiquities dealers. Rivera, see if our tech guys can enhance the video at all to get any part of the hooded figure's face, or catch a reflection in those glass display cases. I want to know who the hell he is. Clements, see if the crime scene team picked up anything from the scene. Moretti, keep digging into Fuller's life just in case he was in on this. See if anything pops. But we've all had a long night, so for now, everyone grab a couple of hours sleep. I need everybody fresh. He saw Baxter scowl. Luke knew his team, knew they were all eager to find justice for the dead, but if they were running on fumes, they could make mistakes. He watched them reluctantly file out. Blair was leaning against the table. Anywhere to grab some food around here? I want to. You too, Blair. Her mouth opened, then closed. You want me to sleep, while some fucker is out there with 2 dangerous swords? I need you sharp. McCade, on some missions, I don't sleep for days. Not this one. I won't tolerate mistakes that might mean we miss our chance to nail this guy. She moved closer, her boots brushing his, her bi-colored eyes narrowed. I can't rest knowing more innocent people could die any second. It's my job to stop this. After you sleep for a few hours. This close, he could see the exhaustion on her stubborn face. No, I refuse to be too late to stop the next massacre, and mark my words, McCade, this isn't over. Her words were fueled by emotion. I know, Blair. I know. He watched her face. There was something else behind her outburst, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. Whatever was driving her, he didn't want anyone else hurt, and that included Blair Badass Mason. Not that he was telling her that he was looking out for her. She'd probably punch him. We can't risk you not moving fast enough next time we face him. She blew out a breath. Fuck. She threw her hands in the air. This is bullshit. Do you want more people to die? No. Why are you getting so fired up about this? You know you're tired. It's just a few hours. She froze, and he saw something working behind her eyes. Pain. He was a detective, trained to notice the tiniest nuances on a person's face. Old pain echoed in her eyes. She hid it. Fine. A couple of hours, and that's it. Oh, the detective in him wanted to know what answers she was hiding. The man in him wanted to know what drove her. Damn. Now wasn't the time. Untangling all of Blair Mason's layers would require weeks and maybe a chainsaw. Time to refocus. How long before Ty has any information on the sword? Blair shrugged. Could be fast or slow, you never know. Brief me when you know. She pulled a face. Yes, sir. They walked out of headquarters together. You need a lift? Blair shook her head and pointed. A sleek, sporty motorcycle in fire engine red was parked near his Explorer. I had Axel drop it off. She swung a long leg over the bike and pulled on a black helmet. I'll see you in a few hours, McCade. Don't spend too much time getting your beauty sleep. Luke shoved his hands on his hips and watched Blair tear off. She drove him crazy. But Luke was coming to realize one important thing. He wanted Blair Mason more than he'd wanted any woman in a very long time. He'd tried denying it, ignoring it, but it wasn't going away. And very soon, he was going to do something about it. Chapter 3. Blair pulled her red Ford Mustang up in front of the LVMPD headquarters. A moment later, McCade pushed out of the front doors, his long legs eating up the distance to her car. He wore a battered brown leather jacket over a blue shirt, and his handgun was holstered on one hip, his badge on the other. Untamed masculine power. She sniffed, annoyed at her response. She'd felt that hard, muscled body pressed up against her when they'd had their little scuffle at his car. McCade was built. She'd give him that. She'd grabbed a few hours of sleep, and she had no intention of telling the annoying man that she felt refreshed. He yanked open the passenger side door.
What happened to the Ducati?
She grinned at him. I didn't think you'd be happy sitting on the back of my bike. He snorted and slammed the door.
You got some rest?
A couple of hours. You?
I grabbed some at the station.
Right. So he made everyone else get some good rest, but not himself. Blair pulled out into traffic.
You called me and said you'd pick me up,
he said.
So where are we going?
We're headed to the bunker. Ty has some information for us, but first, I need coffee. She stopped at a small coffee place near the airport and ordered a huge black coffee for herself. What's your poison?
Black coffee as well, but you know, regular size.
She handed his smaller takeout cup to him, then took a huge gulp from hers. Ah, heaven.
Why don't you just set up an IV?
He asked. Blair smiled. Good idea. When she pulled back onto the road, his cologne seemed to fill the entire car. The man was annoying and self-righteous, but he smelled good. She tried to breathe shallowly so his crisp, woodsy scent didn't work its way into her senses. Not working. She grabbed her coffee, sipped, and burned her lip.
How are your stitches today?
He asked. Fine. There are only 3 of them. Anything less than 10 doesn't count. He stared at her for a beat before he shook his head and lifted his coffee. Soon they approached a rear security gate at McCarran Airport. She showed her ID to the guards and drove toward the bunker. Team 52's Las Vegas base of operations was an ugly block of concrete in a quiet corner of the airport. There was a small hangar attached where Team 52 kept their experimental jet copter when they came in from Area 52. It was also where their logistics manager organized things for them when they were in Las Vegas. Blair climbed out of the vehicle and headed inside, McCade close on her heels. Blair? The pretty blonde sitting at the front desk bounded to her feet, a wide, gorgeous smile on her face. Hey, Kins. Blair moved closer and gave the woman a quick hug. The blonde's gaze went over Blair's shoulder. And Detective McCade!
Afternoon.
I'm Kinsey, she said to McCade. He nodded.
I know. I was involved during your kidnapping ordeal. Glad to see you're okay.
Kinsey's pretty nose wrinkled. Thank you. I'm happy to say that the whole kidnapping thing is well behind me. Kinsey was shacked up with Smith now, and the pair of them were crazy in love. Blair narrowly avoided shaking her head. Smith Creed was over 6 feet of badass and not the biggest sharer of feelings. But somehow Kinsey had waltzed through the man's defenses. Still, it had taken Kinsey being kidnapped and held hostage by a terrorist group to knock some sense into Smith. She'd gone through a terrible ordeal and ended up taking a bullet at the end of it. They'd all been scared out of their minds. Blair knew there was nothing worse than waiting to hear if a loved one was okay, being helpless to save them. Actually, there was something worse. Her chest contracted. Finding out the person you loved more than anything was gone. Blair shook off the past and focused on Kinsey. It had been touch and go for a while, and Blair had watched Smith go through hell waiting to know that Kinsey would pull through. Blair was damn happy that the 2 of them had found their happily ever after. They now called Smith's cabin just outside of the city home. And Smith had smiled more in the last few weeks than he had in, well, ever. Kinsey shot Blair and McCade her megawatt former showgirl smile. She waved a hand to a nearby doorway. The others are in the conference room. Blair and McCade moved at the same time, their arms brushing. Electricity skated up her arm and she barely suppressed a hiss. The corners of his lips twitched.
After you.
The bunker conference room was a slightly more high-tech version of what they'd had at police headquarters. There was a sleek conference table, ergonomic chairs, and a huge screen on the wall. The screen was filled with the face of Dr. Ty Sampson. The former military scientist spent most of his time out at Area 52, although Blair knew Ty had a place in Vegas. She suspected he stayed at base to avoid people interrupting him. He preferred working on his experimental designs for vehicles and gadgets for the team over socializing. Right now, his handsome face, with short black hair, dark skin, and neatly trimmed goatee, was scowling. Ty's typical look. His broad shoulders were visible, encased in a white lab coat.
I've been running tests on the sword. Age, composition. It's made from a specialized Japanese steel called tamahagane. Construction is typical for Japanese katanas. A curved, single-edged blade with a long grip to accommodate two hands. It dates to the 15th century.
Blair looked at McCade. Muramasa's time.
Did you find anything that would explain this bizarre berserker reaction it generates in people?
Lachlan asked. Ty gave one shake of his head.
No.
The guy had increased strength, Ty, Blair said. There has to be something. The scientist lifted his chin.
Good morning to you too, Mason.
She rolled her eyes. Good morning, Dr. Sampson. She used a sing-song voice. Trading barbs with Ty was a pleasant pastime. She held out her arms. Look, barely a scratch on me. I survived the homicidal sword wielder. Thanks for asking. Ty lifted his chin.
Glad to see you didn't get an arm sliced off. No offense, Lachlan.
Lachlan looked at the ceiling, crossing both his prosthetic and regular arms over his t-shirt-covered chest. Blair clasped her hands to her chest. Your concern is touching, Ty. So sweet. A woman shouldered into view on the screen, nudging Ty back a step. He scowled at her. Enough of the chit-chat. Dr. Natalie Blackwell smiled, pushing her dark braid back over one slim shoulder. The Australian was Team 52's archaeologist. She wore a pretty pink shirt with a tie at the neck. Even at base, the woman looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine called Sexy Librarians Are Us. I've been gathering all kinds of information on this swordsmith, Muramasa. His full name was Shingo Muramasa, and he was known as one of the most famous sword makers in Japanese history. Not quite the best, that title goes to Masamune. There are no exact dates for when these men lived, but Masamune predated Muramasa. There are some myths that Muramasa was a student of the master, but it's likely they missed each other by at least 100 years. So this Muramasa, Blair said. What's so special about his swords? His swords had a few unusual features, Nat said. He frequently used a wave-shaped hamon on his blades.
Hamon?
McCade said. It literally means blade pattern, Blair said. It was a visual effect on the blade caused by the hardening process. McCade's brows rose.
You know about swords.
I like weapons. Nat cleared her throat. Muramasa also used a distinctive fish belly shape for the nakago, which is the back portion of the blade where it extends into the hilt. Lachlan frowned.
None of this translates to a weapon with advanced powers.
Patience, Lachlan. Nat tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Some accounts I've found about Muramasa claim that while he was renowned for being a genius at making swords, he also had a terrible temperament. Sounds like you, Ty, Blair said. The scientist shot her the finger. Nat ignored them. Muramasa had an abrasive, violent personality and was prone to flying into rages. And yes, the legends say that his swords were cursed. That as he created them, he prayed that they would become great destroyers.
Shit,
Seth muttered. The Tokugawa dynasty ended up banning his swords despite the fact that they were prized for their exquisite sharpness. So many of the Tokugawa family had been killed or committed suicide with Muramasa blades that the blades were said to be cursed. Nat tucked an escaped strand of hair behind her ear. They were said to cause bloodlust, that the swords thirsted for blood, and if the wielder didn't kill somebody, then the sword compelled them to commit suicide.
Dios,
Axel said. Nat leaned closer to the screen. That said, I traced the history of the swords in the Soul of the Samurai exhibit. The deceased estate, it was a family descended from the Tokugawa. They kept the swords, Blair breathed. So it seems. Nat leaned back. There's an ancient legend that talks about a contest between Muramasa and Masamune.
but you said Masamune lived well before Muramasa,
McCade said. Nat nodded. Yes, but the legend illustrates the beliefs about Muramasa and his swords. The story says that Muramasa challenged Masamune to a sword-making competition. They both crafted their blades and suspended them over a stream. Muramasa's blade, called 10,000 Cold Nights, cut everything that passed it. Leaves, sticks, fish. But Masamune's blade, called Tender Hands, only cut leaves. The fish swam up to it safely. Muramasa laughed and believed he'd won, but a monk watching the contest declared that Masamune's sword was superior because Muramasa's blade cut indiscriminately, that it was evil and bloodthirsty. In contrast, Masamune's blade didn't cut the innocent and undeserving needlessly.
McCade shook his head. How can a sword be cursed, even by scientific means? I'm still working on it,
Ty said.
I'm testing for all types of toxins and poisons. It must be something in the way the sword was made, but I haven't found it yet.
There was silence around the room. Everyone knew that the longer it took for them to work out what was going on, the greater the chance that more people would die.
I've got my team questioning dealers, fences, and collectors across the city,
McCade said. Blair eyed him. She strongly suspected that while she and the other detectives had been sleeping, McCade had been working.
We dug into Fuller's life. He's clean. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Poor bastard,
Axel said. Suddenly, McCade's phone rang. He nodded at them, pulling it out of his pocket. Blair watched as he stalked out of the room, pressing the phone to his ear. Lachlan moved closer.
He holding anything back from us?
She shook her head. He sent me and his detectives home for a nap, but as far as I know, he hasn't got any leads. He's as motivated as us to find the swords. But when McCade returned, her gaze went to his face and she tensed. He looked grim.
There's been another incident.
Blair straightened. What?
We've had reports of people being attacked by someone wielding a sword. Several are reportedly dead.
Blair's hands curled into fists. Where?
A fancy penthouse at the Waldorf Astoria. You need us?
Lachlan asked. McCade shook his head.
Reports are that the perpetrator is gone. He only left bodies.
McCade looked at Blair.
Let's roll.
Blair pulled her Mustang to stop in front of the sleek tower of the Waldorf Astoria. Luke saw several police cruisers out front. As he climbed out, he nodded at the nearby uniforms. Well, one perk of being police are the prime parking spots, Blair murmured. Not sure it outweighs the death, crime, and mayhem, though. He shot her a look, holding the door to the lobby open for her. Inside, they strode toward the bank of elevators. They skirted the large Christmas tree set up in the center of the lobby. He saw the uniforms waiting for them. One officer nodded at him.
This is the private elevator to the crime scene, detective. Housekeeping called it in. Thanks.
He nodded and gestured Blair into the elevator. He stabbed the floor button for the penthouse and resisted the urge to tap his boot or punch the fancy mirrored walls. He knew what awaited them at the top. Beside him, Blair was relaxed, leaning against the elevator wall like she didn't have a care in the world. But as anger punched in his gut, he saw the lines bracketing her eyes. He studied her more closely. Her jaw was tight. Her hands were curled hard around the railing. She wasn't as unaffected as she pretended.
Whoever did it is gone,
he said.
The first cops on the scene cleared the penthouse and security footage confirmed that the man responsible left.
Blair nodded, but he noted her fingers brush over her holstered Sig Sauer. When the elevator slowed and the doors opened, several cops were waiting for them. Baxter was there, looking rumpled.
Hell of a mess, Luke.
Luke's stomach hardened. The penthouse was all sleek tiles, glass, and opulence. It was decorated in an overdone style that shouted, "I'm rich," and, as he strode forward, he eyed a life-sized Buddha statue. No way he could relax in a place like this. At the end of his shift, he liked to grab a beer, drop onto a comfy couch, and watch a game. Huge, complicated chandeliers dominated the ceiling, and the couch looked as comfortable as a rock. He wondered if Blair liked it. When he glanced her way, he saw her top lip was curled, and he fought a smile. Then he saw the blood. The urge to smile died a quick death. Lots of blood. There were 3 bodies lying in the living area. Blood had formed thin red rivers across the tiles. The bodies were all tough-looking men in suits. They all had handguns. Luke moved down the hall, Blair moving silently behind him. They checked the first bedroom. It was untouched. Then he moved into the master. There was a wall of windows surrounding it, but his gaze went straight to the giant circular bed. There was a woman resting on the white sheets. Dead. Shit. Luke took in the blood soaking the sheets and the bloody footprints on the carpet. For a second he was back in his childhood home, seeing other bloody footprints and his mother's lifeless eyes. His hand curled tight. "McCade." He sucked in a breath and kept staring at the carpet. "Hey." A hand touched his cheek and he looked into Blair's mismatched eyes. Her steady gaze snapped him back. "I'm okay." He moved toward the windows, staring down at the city below. Casino signs blinked merrily and taillights on Las Vegas Boulevard winked on and off. They were unaffected by the death. But somewhere down there were 2 dangerous weapons. "No swords here," Blair said. "Clearly one of the swords was here." "Yeah, it got away from someone." And Luke knew it could happen again. "Who owns the apartment?" Blair asked. "Let's find out." Luke strode back into the living room. "Owner of the apartment?" One of the cops moved forward. "Dummy Corporation." Baxter lifted a small notepad. "Rivera's tracking it down, but he said there's a long trail of offshore companies. It'll take time, and to be honest, we might not ever get the answer." Luke looked over and saw Blair wandering around the edge of the black pools. She stopped, hands on her hips, looking down at the dead men. "What do you see?" he asked her. These guys were muscle. Guards. "And the woman?" She arched a brow. "Entertainment." "So what does that add up to?" "Someone with money." "You think whoever was here was a collector or a buyer?" That's what Luke thought. "I don't know yet." Something flashed in Blair's eyes. "But I don't care how many fucking dummy corporations they're hiding behind. We need to find them." "For once, Mason, you and I are on the same page." Chapter 4. Sitting on the edge of Luke's desk, Blair sipped her coffee and munched on a slightly stale cupcake. She'd made McCade stop for coffee and a snack on their way back to the station. "We do have chairs, you know." He nudged one with his boot. "I like it here." She swiveled, eyeing his neat and tidy desk. "It's interesting watching you in your milieu." "You know what milieu means?" "Oh, sting to the heart. You saying I'm just a dumb marine grunt?" Something flashed in his eyes. "You'll never hear me say that." She grinned. "I think I'm growing on you, McCade." He snorted. Blair snatched a pen off the desk and threw it at him. Of course, he caught it with lightning-fast reflexes. Their gazes locked for a second, and she felt the hum of sexual tension between them. She released a breath. Something in her head warned her to get far, far away from this man. Luke McCade wouldn't be an easy, fun lover you tussled with and then walked away from with a smile. But Blair was no coward. McCade finally broke the connection, then grabbed his coffee and sipped. Any luck tracking down the corporation that owns the penthouse? She asked.
No, it's a tangle of shell companies and offshore corporations.
Frustration laced his voice. I know someone who can untangle it. McCade raised a brow, leaning back in his chair. Brooks. Team 52's resident computer geek and former naval intelligence officer could perform miracles with computers. He could probably crack it in a few minutes. McCade pondered the offer, then nodded. Blair reached into her backpack and pulled out her secure, heavy-duty tablet. She woke it up from sleep mode, tapping in the commands to initiate a secure call to the Area 52 base. The Team 52 logo blinked onto the screen, then dissolved, leaving Brooks's handsome face behind. His brown hair was a little mussed, his dark-framed glasses heightened his sexy geek look, and tattoos in red, blues, and greens peeked out from the sleeve of his black t-shirt. The shirt pictured a set of fangs on it with the words, "Rancor ate my homework" in the center. Blair resisted rolling her eyes at Brooks's never-ending supply of humorous shirts. He smiled. Well, howdy there, Deputy Mason. His voice was an exaggerated drawl. She poked her tongue out. I'm with the police, not the sheriff. Do you have a shiny star? Shut it, Brooks. We need your help. What have you got for me? He cracked his knuckles and pushed his glasses back up on his straight nose. We can't track down who owns the penthouse of the latest attack. McCade tells me it's owned by some tangle of dummy corporations. Brooks's face turned serious. Send the info through to me. Blair tapped the screen. Sent. McCade came up behind her, looking over her shoulder. She felt the heat of him on her back and resisted the urge to elbow him. His woodsy scent engulfed her, and she fought back a moan. Hey there, Detective McCade, Brooks said.
Brooks.
McCade was close enough that his deep voice shivered through Blair. She felt the brush of his breath on her ear. Damn! Again, she found herself breathing through her mouth to minimize his impact. Oh yeah, looks like a nice little tangle. Brooks's fingers flew over the screen of his tablet. But they can't hide from me. For a second, Blair and McCade shared an amused glance.
Geeks are the same,
McCade murmured.
Doesn't matter if they work for the police or not.
I heard that, Brooks grumbled. Then he straightened and shot a hand into the air. Got something. McCade's eyebrows rose.
That quickly?
I have skills, Detective. I also have a name. Bright Sea Industries. Blair tapped a finger on her chin and looked at McCade. Mean anything? He shook his head. I'm running some searches on the company, Brooks said. I'll send you through what I find. Thanks, Brooks. I owe you some of that toffee you love. I won't say no. Stay safe. The screen went black. Blair swiveled her head. Okay, so we find out who the hell owns Brightsea. There was a brisk click of heels. She heard McCade groan. Blair raised her head to a slick-looking woman striding through the homicide section toward them. She was slender and wore a dark suit that fitted her perfectly, the snug skirt showing off her slim legs. Her dark brown hair was pulled up in a complicated twist at the back of her head. She was carrying 2 steaming takeaway coffee cups. Luke? Her gaze settled on him, her voice filled with warm promise.
Allison.
McCade's voice was empty of everything except irritation. The woman's brown eyes landed on Blair and she lifted her chin. Then she looked away. Oh, Blair had been dismissed. She crossed her jean-clad legs, picked up her coffee, and took another sip. The woman stopped. Luke, did you arrest this woman? Blair's eyebrows rose and she turned to look at McCade with wide eyes.
No,
he bit out. But sometimes he wishes he could, Blair added. He shot her a look.
I could think of some things to do with my handcuffs.
For a fleeting second, Blair had the far too tempting image of him spread out on a bed, naked, cuffed to the headboard. Hot, dirty desire hit like a shotgun blast. She forced the image away and sniffed. I can pick handcuff locks. She saw a flare of heat in his eyes before he turned back to the woman.
Allison, why are you here?
The woman had a sour look on her face. I had to pick up some documents for one of my cases.
Ugh, a lawyer.
Blair took another sip of coffee. Then a soft look crossed Allison's face. And I miss you. McCade circled his desk and dropped back into his chair. Blair had the vague impression that he was trying to put some distance between himself and the woman.
This isn't the time or place for personal conversations,
he said.
I'm busy.
Miss Lawyer tilted her head. Then return my calls. Let's go out for dinner again. God, he dated this woman? Blair smothered a snort behind her coffee cup. She sensed the woman look at her again, then she once again focused on McCade. She held up one of the cups. I got you coffee. I know just how you like it. Score a point for double meaning. Blair's gaze dropped to the coffee cup McCade already had on his desk. He's got coffee, Slick. The woman's head swiveled and she glared at Blair. Luke, who is this woman? He shoved a hand through his hair.
Allison, I'm busy with a case.
The Las Vegas slasher? Blair groaned. She hated the media and their dumb names. Really? That's the best they could come up with?
It is unimaginative,
McCade said with a brief smile. Who are you? Allison demanded. McCade stood.
She's a consultant.
Allison frowned. She doesn't look like a consultant. Blair snorted. Damn, I may lose sleep knowing you think that. Miss Lawyer stiffened her spine. Look, I don't mean to be rude, but Luke and I need some privacy. Lady, we're working. We're trying to stop people from losing their lives. You don't seem stupid, so I'm guessing you can read that he's done with you, but you're ignoring the signals. I suggest you turn around on those skinny heels and walk out. Allison's face went red. What did you just say to me? Blair sighed. You heard me. Look, I don't do catfights. Suddenly, McCade was at Blair's side. He threw an arm across her chest.
Don't antagonize her.
Blair huffed out a breath. I'm just sitting here.
I wasn't talking to you. Allison, don't antagonize her.
But Allison cocked a hip, looking like she was ready to launch into a tirade. Clemens appeared, eyeing Allison like she'd smelled something bad. Back again, Allison? The lawyer's nose wrinkled. Detective Clemens. I wouldn't mess with Blair. She's already broken someone's nose in here today. Blair smiled at the female detective. That was an accident. And you also broke his arm. McCade made a choked noise and Allison's eyes went as large as dinner plates. Okay, you got me, Clemens, Blair said. That bit wasn't an accident. Suddenly, McCade's phone rang, and for once he looked happy for the distraction. He pressed it to his ear.
McCade? Got it.
He ended the call, turning to give Allison his back.
Got a call from a dealer who might have something for us. Let's go.
You dated that woman? Luke glanced at Blair in the passenger seat of his Explorer.
Unfortunately. Although she wasn't a bitch to me at the time.
Blair shifted. So you like polished women in designer labels and heels? He looked at her more intently.
No. I like someone who is loyal, works hard, has values. It took me a while to discover Allison was more interested in Allison than anything else.
Guess your detective skills need some polish. Luke shook his head. Allison was the least of his problems and had already sucked up too much of his time. They were driving into the arts district not far from the headquarters where a number of higher quality pawn shops and dealers were situated. He pulled up in front of Harrison's Pawn. When they got out, he scanned the street, then the wide window of the shop. As he and Blair stepped inside, Harrison Gold was standing beside a glass case filled with jewelry and other valuables. He was a short man with a round belly and a wide smile. He'd owned his shop for over 30 years and had always cooperated with the police.
Detective McCade.
Harrison bustled forward.
Nice to see you.
Blair broke away, moving down another aisle of the shop. She was no doubt soaking in every detail of the place. Luke studied Harrison. The man looked nervous. Perspiration coated his round face.
You said someone's been asking around about some Japanese swords?
Harrison bobbed his head.
They're offering lots of money to buy these swords.
So it wasn't someone selling, it was someone looking to buy.
Who's the interested buyer?
Harrison swallowed and shook his head.
I don't have a name, just got rumors. Someone's fishing.
How much are they willing to pay?
Millions.
Luke looked over at Blair and saw her eyeing the pawn dealer. Luke refocused on Harrison, who was rubbing his fingers over a non-existent spot on the countertop.
Anything else for me?
Nope. No, that was it. Just saw the news on the slasher and thought it might help.
It wasn't much, but it was something. Luke nodded.
You have my number. Give me a call if you find out anything else. And Harrison, if these swords turn up, you call me.
As Luke headed for the door, he paused and glanced back.
And don't touch the swords without gloves on.
Harrison swiped a hand over his graying hair.
Okay.
Luke strode out with Blair right behind him. He knows more than he's saying, she said.
Yeah, but he's a pretty decent guy. I expect he'll call me soon.
So someone knows the swords were stolen and wants them. They walked down the street toward his SUV.
That's my take.
The attack came out of nowhere. The lean, muscular figure was dressed all in black. He wore a mask over the bottom half of his face. Only his black eyes were visible. He moved fast, and suddenly Luke saw sunlight glinting off metal. The man was holding a katana. Luke cursed, diving to the side. He hit the sidewalk. Blair ducked the swinging sword and spun away. Luke rose, drawing his handgun, but before he could fire, the man came at him with a flurry of swings. Luke leaped backwards, slamming into a parked car. The sword swung again, and Luke was pinned. Then Blair rammed into the guy. She knocked him off balance, and Luke pushed away from the car. Blair launched into an attack. Luke straightened, watching her fight. She fought with that power and brutal strength he'd seen before. It wasn't pretty or practiced. This was real life and death fighting. He watched her kick the sword, and it flew out of the attacker's hand. Luke quickly lifted his Glock and fired. The man dived. Damn, missed. The attacker was too close to Blair, and Luke couldn't risk firing again. The man leaped into the air. He launched into an intricate combination of martial arts kicks. Shit, he moved so damn fast. Blair dodged, blocked, and got in a few blows. Then the man managed to land a kick to Blair's gut. She flew backward, slamming into a shop window. But she instantly charged forward again. Come on, asshole, can't you do better than that? God, she was goading him. The man let out a shout and slammed a vicious kick to her hip. She stumbled. Shit. Luke strode closer, with no thought except to protect Blair. He watched the attacker scoop the dropped sword off the ground, lifting it high. This time, Luke kicked the man. The man turned, swinging the sword. Luke leaned back but felt the stinging kiss of the blade above his left eye. Then suddenly gunshots rang out. Bam, bam, bam! The bullets hit the sidewalk. The man dropped the sword, spun, and ran. Damn! Luke gave chase, racing down the sidewalk. But the man jerked between two parked cars and ran into the street. Cars screeched and horns blared. Luke jerked to a stop and watched the assailant disappear into an alley across the street. Luke swiveled and saw Blair standing beside him, holding her cig beside her thigh. You're bleeding. She strode up to him, yanking her jacket off, then her shirt. For a second, his chest hitched. Then he saw she was wearing a tank underneath. She pressed the wadded shirt above his eye. God, this is bleeding everywhere, she said. We need to get this cleaned up.
It isn't bad enough for a trip to the emergency room.
He didn't have time to sit around twiddling his thumbs.
Need to drop this sword off at headquarters.
It didn't seem to have the same effect as the one from the exhibit.
No, but I still want it checked.
He rubbed his blood-stained shirt.
Let's drop the sword, then I need a change of clothes anyway. We'll head to my place.
She paused for a second. Okay, let's go. Chapter 5. They had a big fight over who drove. The man was injured. Okay, it wasn't a bad cut, but still. Blair didn't like the fact that McCade won. As he drove down a tidy street lined with typical Las Vegas houses in Spring Valley, she cast a worried glance his way. He had blood all down the side of his face, and the cut over his eye was still oozing. There was a strange feeling in Blair's stomach. She didn't like seeing him hurt. It was silly because she'd seen people hurt way worse than this before. So what made this situation different? He pulled into a driveway and cut the engine. She climbed out and paused, hand on the top of the door, studying his house. It was nice and tidy, with cream stucco and a tile roof, a double garage, and a warm-toned wooden door. The yard was done in xeriscaping to suit the hot Las Vegas climate and reduce the need for water. She guessed it was easier maintenance for a workaholic police detective as well. McCade eyed her as he walked to the front door.
Don't worry, Blair, the suburbs aren't contagious.
She snorted and followed him. He unlocked the front door and she glanced around with interest. Glossy wooden floors, pale gray walls. There was the requisite oversized leather couch and a huge TV. It politely said, "Single man who knows what he likes." Then he moved into the kitchen and her eyes popped open. The place was a showpiece. The top-of-the-line stainless steel appliances and granite looked like they'd been designed by a chef. "You cook?" she asked.
Not often, but I'm not too bad. People I bought the place off of had renovated the kitchen.
Blair couldn't boil an egg. Okay, she could, but it was likely to be rubbery. Her gaze snagged on the blood on his face. "Quit gawking at his kitchen, Blair, and remember why you're here. First aid kit?"
Under the sink.
She found a huge red box. Of course, McCade would be prepared and have a king-sized first aid kit. Under the sink and moved toward him. "Sit." Shooting her a disgruntled look, he pulled out a chair from the wooden dining table and sat down. Through the large window facing the backyard, she saw the glitter of afternoon light on water. "You have a pool?"
Yeah, it was part of the reason why I bought the place. It's heated, too.
The pool was large and deep blue in color. The yard wasn't big, and there was paving all around it with a few small trees lining the back fence. Blair loved to swim. It was her dream to one day have a house with a pool. She set the first aid kit down on the table and popped it open. She grabbed some sterile wipes and started cleaning the blood off his face. When she got a better look at the cut, she decided it could probably do with a couple of stitches. Without a few stitches, this will probably scar.
It's fine.
Blair tried to imagine how she could convince him to go to the hospital and failed. She sighed. She'd refused the hospital herself, more times than she could count. She pulled out a bandage and carefully placed it over the cut. "There you go." Then Blair noticed how tense he was, and she stilled. She realized she was standing between his outspread legs. Between those muscled thighs, dark denim was stretched tight. She swallowed and looked at his rugged face. She saw a little bit of dried blood at his temple and reached up and rubbed it away. Their gazes locked. He'd protected her today. He'd rushed in to defend her from the attacker. It had been unnecessary, of course, since she didn't need protecting. But still there was a part of her that liked it. She wasn't used to being protected. Having backup, yes. Protected, no. McCade's hands moved, gripping her hips.
Blair.
His deep voice shivered through her. He tugged her closer, pulling her tighter between his legs. He just kept staring at her, and she waited, fighting an internal battle.
"You going to keep ignoring this pull between us?"
he said. She sucked in a breath. It was the first time he'd stated it outright. "I was thinking about it."
"I want you."
God! His words shivered through her. Damn it, she wanted him too. "You're a really bad idea," she said. "One will fight all the time, two will argue all the time."
"Fighting and arguing are the same, so that's really one point."
"We have a professional relationship." He snorted.
"We're usually facing off and yelling at each other. I wouldn't call that very professional."
Luke McCade was a good man. He had a neat, tidy house, and she was sure he pictured putting a neat, tidy woman in it one day, and having neat, tidy kids. That was so not Blair. And he made her want things that frankly scared the shit out of her. But she'd never been a woman to deny herself what she wanted. Maybe she and McCade could twist up the sheets, burn off this tension, and walk away. Yes, that sounded like a plan. She lowered her head and kissed him. His mouth opened and she slid her tongue in. Oh man, he tasted delicious. She sank her hand into his hair, tugging on the thick strands. He pulled her closer and she felt the heat of him pumping off his big body. She loved his size, his height, the hard breadth of his shoulders. A growl vibrated through him and he deepened the kiss. More. She needed more. Emotions stormed through her, leaving her head spinning. They kissed like they'd never get enough of each other, fingers digging in, barely coming up for air. For a moment, Blair forgot where she was. Hell, she barely remembered her own name. What the hell was this? She pulled back, panting. Fooling around with a guy, sex, it was supposed to be fun, easy. That was... Shit, she didn't know what it was.
"Pretty damn awesome."
She shook her head. "You should stick to sleek lawyers, McCade." The corners of his lips lifted, but she could tell that he was annoyed.
"I've had my tongue in your mouth, Blair, so it's about time you call me Luke."
She just stared at him.
"I see all those tough layers of yours, Blair. I see them, and I've decided to cut through them and find what's beneath."
Her heart thudded hard. Panic slid through her veins, and she worked hard to find some scathing words, something to make him back off. She needed him to back off. Blair opened her mouth just as her phone beeped. Grateful for the interruption, she pulled it out of her pocket and saw a text from Lachlan. It said one word. Griffins. "I need to meet my team." McCade stood.
"I'm coming."
"That's unnecessary. I'll update you."
"I'm coming."
His voice was firm and unyielding. Fine. She needed to get out of his nice house with its nice pool and no doubt his nice bedroom with a nice big bed. This didn't happen.
It happened.
Blair swallowed a frustrated growl. They didn't talk on the drive to the sports bar. Before he'd even put the Explorer into park, she was out, striding toward the bar. She opened the door and instantly the familiar sights and sounds eased her. The long wooden bar was lined with stools and there was a row of television screens over the bar, tuned in to different sports games. A few pool tables occupied another area at the back. Her team was sitting at the long, scratched-up bar. Blair really needed a beer, but since she was working, a Coke would have to do. Lachlan's gold gaze zeroed in on her face, then flicked to McCade. There was no missing the bandage over Luke's eye. "What happened?" "Blair, did you hurt our poor detective?" Seth wore a shit-eating grin. She shot her teammate a sour look. "We were attacked." She sat on a stool. "We went to see a dealer and a guy with a sword was waiting for us when we left." McCade took the seat beside hers.
"Wouldn't be surprised if the tip the dealer received was just to lure us out."
Blair went into detail on the attack, listening to her teammates grumble and Axel curse in Spanish. Lachlan had a very unhappy look on his face. Pulling Lachlan's fries closer, Blair dug in. She was starving. Suddenly, McCade's phone rang. With a jerk of his chin, he moved toward the pool tables to take the call. Damn, that man's phone rang constantly. It would drive Blair insane.
How's it going?
Lachlan asked. Fine.
That's it?
So far. Her friend was eyeing her suspiciously. You? She asked.
Chasing leads, but nothing yet. Brooks is digging into this Bright Sea Industries.
Lachlan swiveled on his stool.
You're pretty wound up for someone who's fine. Not like you.
I'm fine. Callie leaned closer, dark eyes narrowed. Oh my God, did you sleep with him?
What?
Blair's pulse spiked.
Who, McCade? No. I only saw you guys a few hours ago.
Callie wagged a finger at her. Something happened. Blair shoved another fry into her mouth. She and the others had given Lachlan, Seth, and Smith a hell of a hard time as the men had fallen in love with their respective women. Blair was not planning on being on the receiving end of the same treatment. Did you kiss him? Callie persisted. Blair opened her mouth and closed it. When she looked up, her entire team was grinning at her. Shut it, assholes. I was almost killed by a ninja today.
Samurai,
Seth said.
McCade returned. Tests on the sword from the attack this afternoon came back.
That was fast, she said.
Didn't take long. Sword's a cheap knockoff. Nothing special about it.
As he sat back down, Blair sensed her team looking at McCade, then at her and back again. Shit. She shoved more fries in her mouth. This is me, Blair said. Luke pulled to a stop in front of a mid-sized apartment building not far from the strip. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was well maintained. She jumped out of the car before he could say anything else. He rolled his eyes. So damn prickly. But there had been nothing prickly or hesitant about the kiss they'd shared. She kissed with every inch of her being, all in. Luke could still feel her, taste her. When he got out of the car, she frowned at him. What are you doing?
I'm seeing you to your door, and I'm going to come up and check your apartment. We were attacked today.
There's no need. I'm a big girl.
I know. I'm still coming up.
She unlocked the front door of the building and they walked in. She shot him an impressive scowl. You're a pain in my ass, she snapped.
You're a pain in my ass,
he countered. She took the stairs to the next floor and he followed her down the hall. As they approached the door at the end, he saw her stiffen. He glanced at her apartment. The door was ajar. At the same moment, they both drew their weapons. She met his gaze, face serious, and nodded her head. He nodded back. She nudged the door open with her shoulder. As Blair went high, he went low. They entered her apartment. At first glance, it looked untouched, and as he took it in, his eyes widened. This was not what he'd expected from Blair Mason. The walls were covered in bright artwork. The paintings were all splashes of paint in wild blues, greens, and yellows. There were also lots of shelves stuffed with books. Focusing on the task at hand, they quickly cleared the two-bedroom apartment, where he tried not to take too much notice of her metal-framed four-poster bed. They came back into the living room, and clearly his surprise was evident on his face. What were you expecting? She bit out. Guns and knives on the walls? Skull and flames decor? Luke paused for a second.
Yeah.
She rolled her eyes. There's no one here now, and nothing looks like it's missing. She checked her security system. It had been disabled.
So who was here and what did they want?
He said. Neither of them had any answers. Let's take a closer look around, she said. They did another walkthrough. Clothes littered the floor in her bedroom. Luke snatched up a twist of filmy fabric off the floor.
Most former military personnel I know are tidy.
Blair turned and snatched the tiny nightgown out of his hand. Hands off. I had enough years of being tidy. At home, I do whatever the hell I want. She turned and then she hissed. She pulled open both her closet doors, and that's when he saw the throwing star, shuriken, embedded in the door. Something primal moved through him. A possessive need to ensure her safety. He didn't like this. Not at all.
I'm staying,
he told her. What? She turned to face him, thrusting her hands on her hips. I don't need a bodyguard, McCade. I'm a military-trained professional. He took a plastic baggie out of his pocket. He kept a small stash for occasions just like this. Using his pen, he worked the shuriken free and slid it into the bag. Maybe they'd get prints, but he didn't think they'd be that lucky.
This is a threat.
She waved a hand. Good. I want to know who the hell came into my place. I can protect myself. And if you stay here, I'll just have to protect your ass as well. Anger clogged his throat.
You're hard-headed and obstinate.
She shoved her hands against his chest, then strode back into the living room.
Blair?
She spun. Do you think I'm some kind of damsel in distress or delicate flower?
No, I don't think that. Wanting to ensure your safety doesn't take away from your ability to protect yourself.
He released a breath.
Look, I don't want to fight with you.
I told you I can take care of myself. She shoved him again, and this time he grabbed her arms. Something exploded in her eyes, and she came at him. Damn, she was strong. They scuffled, and she shoved an elbow into his gut. The air rushed out of him.
Damn it, Blair.
I could take you down right here, she said. He spun her fast, then he shoved her face first against the wall, holding her arms behind her back. She threw herself backward, but he was ready, dodging his head out of the way before the back of her head rammed into his nose. They spun, and he kept a firm grip on her arms.
Why are you fighting me so hard? Am I getting too close, Blair?
Shut up! Her foot whipped out, tripping him. Cursing, he grabbed at her, but she turned, throwing her weight against him. They fell, crashing onto her wooden coffee table. It flipped, and they fell to the floor. Hell! Luke heaved himself up and cursed.
You can't bend or lean on anyone, can you?
She sat up, glaring at him. He shook his head.
You have no soft edges, Blair. You're all hard. You'd cut a man and make him bleed. It's no wonder you're single.
Luke regretted the angry words instantly. It was his frustration talking, but he felt her jerk. Her face went blank. Shit. He'd gone too far. She pushed to her feet, her body stiff. Get out. Fuck. Fuck. But as she just stared at him, he let his anger fuel him. He strode for her front door.
I'm gone.
Chapter 6. Blair stood at her kitchen counter, sipping her coffee. She'd slept like shit after her altercation with Luke. She sighed and took another sip. Like caffeine could solve all her problems. The strong-tasting brew slid down her throat. Normally she'd cook herself a mound of bacon and eggs. She could at least fry one. But the memory of their fight messed with her appetite. Damn it, nothing messed with her appetite. She drank the rest of her coffee and stalked into her bathroom. After she dressed, she pulled her hair up in a ponytail and looked at herself in the mirror. Automatically, her gaze went to her prosthetic eye. No, she wasn't soft. She was toned muscle, a straightforward attitude, and she actually liked beating up bad guys. But she could bend. Maybe. She stroked the corner of her eye. One Ty had made for her when she joined Team 52. She had better vision than before the horrible attack that had taken her eye. Sights, sounds, and smells came back to her, hitting her like bullets. The attack, the bomb blast, Lachlan's shouts. Blair heaved in a breath. That was shit she didn't think about. Shit happened. Her hands curled around the sink. Some people died, other people lived. Life went on. Shaking off her mood, she headed back to the living room to grab her gear. She needed to get to work. As she clipped on her holster, she glanced out the window and noticed the police cruiser sliding slowly down her street. She paused and the breath rushed out of her. She knew. She knew that the cruisers had probably been doing drive-bys all night. Her arms fell to her sides. He'd left her, mad as hell, but he'd still ensured her protection. Shit. Her chest was tight. Heading out her front door, she pulled out her cell phone and called Lachlan. "Hey," she said when he answered.
Hey, got anything?
"Nothing. We'll be checking out more leads today. You?"
Nothing new.
"Do we know how the swords work yet?"
No,
Lachlan replied.
it's driving Ty crazy. The man still hasn't slept.
Bummer. Knowing how the swords functioned could help them dramatically. "Someone broke into my apartment.
What?
Left a shuriken embedded in my closet door." Lachlan growled.
And you didn't call it in?
Nothing else was touched.
Blair!
Her friend's voice was a growl. "I'm meeting McCade at police headquarters. We'll keep going through what we have."
I'm pulling you off police detail.
"Hell no! You're right, if I work with the police, we'll find these swords much faster." Lachlan grunted.
Don't be a superhero, Blair. Any more shurikens, you let me know.
"Yes, boss."
Blair,
A pause.
you're part of a team. Let us help.
Her throat thickened. "Lachlan, do you think I can bend? Or am I all sharp edges?" Another pause.
McCade being an asshole?
She sighed. "I may have provoked him."
You can bend, Blair, but not easily. And all those sharp edges are protecting soft.
She swallowed. "I'm not protecting anything. With me, what you see is what you get." Lachlan made a noise. "Look, I have to go," she said.
We'll be in Vegas today. You need me, just call.
She headed for her parking spot and decided to take her Ducati. A ride would help clear her head. "If we find anything, I'll check in."
Okay. Stay safe, Blair.
Blair tucked her phone away, then tugged her leather jacket closer. There was a nip in the air today. She pulled her helmet off the handlebars. She tugged the helmet on and climbed on her bike. She started it, the engine vibrating between her legs. Smiling, she pulled out, zooming down the street. She decided to make a quick stop on the way to the station for baked goods. She considered donuts, but decided that was too cliched. Besides, she had a hankering for cupcakes. Something told her she was going to need them today. She pulled into Sprinkle's Cupcakes at the Flamingo, her favorite place for those delectable little treats, and grabbed half a dozen of her favorites. She stuck them in her backpack before speeding off again. As she zipped through traffic on Las Vegas Boulevard, out of habit, she scanned her mirrors. It wasn't long before she noticed something. Frowning, she casually glanced in her mirrors. 3 bikes had pulled out of a side street. They were all black, and the riders were all dressed in black. There was nothing about them that should inherently make her suspicious, but out of curiosity, she flicked on her indicator and turned onto another street. As she zoomed through the traffic, she spotted the motorbikes following her. Well, hello there. Blair took a circuitous route along some side streets, not making it easy for them to follow her, but not wanting to lose them either. If they wanted a showdown, she'd give them one. But as soon as she neared police headquarters, her company disappeared. She pulled to a stop in front of the station and slid off her bike. She scanned the street in both directions. They were gone. She stood there for a moment, staring at the traffic rolling past. Maybe she'd imagined it? Maybe, but she doubted it. Shaking her head, she grabbed her backpack, pulled out her cupcakes, and walked inside. The sound of ringing phones, murmured conversations, and distant, raised voices hit her. She had to admit it had a certain charm. She took the stairs 2 at a time. When she reached the homicide section, McCade was already at his desk. Today he was wearing a shirt in deep chocolate brown with dark jeans. The brown exactly matched his eyes, and he looked too damn delicious. Her mouth went a little dry. He looked up at her, and an awkward tension throbbed between them. He was on the phone.
I can't do a family dinner right now, Dad. Yeah, things are busy.
Pause.
Tell Deidre I'll fix that light for her as soon as this case is closed.
Another pause.
Yeah, and why am I the one who has to give my nephew driving lessons? My brother is a perfectly good driver.
A grunt.
Yeah, fine. Okay, look, Dad, I have to go. Yeah, of course I'll be there for Christmas lunch. Yeah, catch you soon.
McCade ended his call.
Family stuff.
That was nice. Blair talked with her mom and dad semi-frequently. Once, a long time ago, they'd been close. But then their lives had imploded and their happy family was gone in a blink. Blair swallowed. Her parents now had busy lives centered around their retirement community in Florida. Your family's in Vegas?
Yeah, Dad, a sister and a brother, a few nieces and nephews.
He rose.
You ready to go through some more security footage from the Waldorf Astoria?
Good morning to you, too. Clearly, he was still pissed. He'd insulted her. He shouldn't be acting angry. Don't give him a reaction, Blair. She opened her container, selected a cupcake, and bit into it. Yeah, lead the way. It was just the two of them in the conference room, and Luke could only describe the atmosphere as tense. He pulled the security footage up on the screen, trying to ignore his reaction to Blair.
You going to share those?
He nodded at the pack of cupcakes in front of her. She pulled them closer to her. No. He watched her white teeth bite into a cupcake. He was mad at himself. Mad that he'd lost it with her last night and lashed out without thinking. It was 2 steps forward, 1 step back with this woman. As the footage rolled, he reached out and stole one of the cupcakes. She rounded on him, anger filling her face. Give that back. No. He took a large bite.
You owe me.
How do you figure that?
Blair, I was pissed off last night. I shouldn't have said what I did.
She stared at the screen resolutely, her body stiff. Fine.
It's not fine.
He understood now that he'd really hurt her. He was only just realizing that Blair Mason's tough hide was covering some incredibly soft spots.
I've got no idea why you're single. You're attractive, smart, and tough. I like all of that. A lot. Too much.
Her gaze swung to him and something worked through her fascinating mismatched eyes. We have a mission to complete. He nodded.
Then the investigation has to be our priority right now.
She gave him a nod, and he swore she almost looked relieved. Luke tapped his fingers on the table.
I'm not giving up, Cupcake.
Hell no. She might think she was safe, but he wanted to understand Blair more than ever. Yeah, he also wanted her naked in his bed, or on any flat surface, but he wanted to know what made this unique woman tick. He was only just realizing that she let very few people slip through her defenses. They both stared at the screen for a while, lost in their respective thoughts. Then she stiffened and leaned forward. Go back. That's when Luke spotted it. A man crossing the street holding a cylindrical tube over his shoulder. That cylinder could hold the swords, Blair said.
Let's check the other cameras. See if we can get him from another angle.
Luke scrolled through. There, she said. Luke froze the footage on the man's face. It was just his profile, but it was clear enough. He had dark eyes and dark hair, with heavy eyebrows and a broad forehead.
I can get some of our tech guys to run this through our facial recognition databases. It'll take some time.
But Blair was already pulling out her tablet. Brooks will be faster. A second later, Brooks's face came up on the screen. Today, his shirt had a picture of an Imperial Walker from Star Wars on it, with a bandage on its leg and a cone used for injured dogs around its neck. Luke's lips twitched. I'm sending you a photo, Brooks, Blair said. I need you to run it through facial recognition. We think it's the person responsible for killing the people at the Waldorf penthouse. I need a name. The man nodded. On it. He tapped on something off screen. Got it. Running it now. Barely a few seconds passed. Got a ping. Guy's name is Anthony Kazan.
Already?
Luke said.
Told you I'm very, very good, Detective.
So who is this Kazan? Blair asked.
He works for some rich guy called Salvador Morgan.
Luke frowned.
I've heard of him. Shady, but never been in any trouble.
Brooks nodded.
Most of his wealth is from real estate. He's also known as a collector of weapons. The older the better.
Luke and Blair shared a glance. For a second, their fight was forgotten.
I've also just found something else.
A wide smile broke on Brooks's face.
Remember the owner of the penthouse at the Waldorf, Bright Sea Industries?
Yeah, Blair said.
Brooks nodded. Salvador Morgan is a board member of Bright Sea.
Brooks kept tapping. Luke froze, excitement hitting him.
So Morgan probably has access to the penthouse. Yes, Brooks said, although my bet is that he owns it. You know what the Welsh meaning of the name Morgan is?
Blair straightened.
No. Bright Sea.
Shit. They were onto something.
Run him, Luke ordered. I need an address.
He looked at Blair.
I think you and I should pay Mr. Morgan a visit.
Chapter 7. It was big and ugly. Blair eyed the enormous mansion. They'd been buzzed in at the gate and driven up the huge circular driveway. The sprawling, vaguely Mediterranean-style house screamed, "Look at me," in the loudest possible way. It was out in Henderson, surrounded by other equally as big homes. She and Luke walked up to the enormous front door inset with etched glass. Salvador Morgan's place was surrounded by lush lawns and neatly pruned gardens. No xeriscaping here. McCade rang the doorbell, and a second later, a man in a suit opened it. He stood ramrod straight, his face dour. "Oh man, a real butler," Blair muttered. The man's stoic face didn't change, but he gave her a look like she'd crawled out from under a rock. McCade held up his badge. The butler stared at it for a second, then waved them in.
"Mr. Morgan will be happy to see you. Please follow me."
Feeling a tiny bit disappointed that the guy didn't have a British accent, Blair entered the mansion. Her boots clicked on the marble tiles. Holy cow. An enormous double staircase led to the upper story. A huge chandelier dominated the void above their heads. The butler shot her another look, and she held up her hands. "Don't worry, I'm not going to steal the silverware." McCade's soft laugh echoed through the foyer. As they walked inside, she glanced into a large living area flooded with light. It was done all in shades of white. White walls, white carpets, white couches. There were also two women lounging on one couch, as sleek as the furniture. They were both wearing tiny bikinis and lots of jewelry. Blair didn't bother to fight her eye roll. The women were long, thin, and clearly model wannabes. She watched their gazes fasten on Luke, interest flaring. Blair rolled her eyes again, leaning in closer to him. What a cliché. I keep expecting a tiger to wander through.
"A white one,"
McCade murmured back. Blair laughed, and the butler speared her with another sharp look. Yeah, I'm not sleek, cultured, or pretentious enough to fit in around here." The man led them down a long hall and stopped at a set of double doors. He knocked, then threw them open to reveal a spacious office decorated in dark woods with gray accents. A man rose from behind an enormous oak desk. Blair took him in briefly before her gaze went to the weapons lining the walls. God, her belly clenched. There were swords, daggers, axes, and crossbows, all of them in top condition. It was one hell of a collection. Then her gaze snagged on a dagger on the wall resting beside its silver sheath. "Shah Jahan's dagger," she breathed.
"It's very rare and one of the most valuable knives ever sold."
The man rounded the desk. He wore gray slacks and a white striped shirt. He had a clean-shaven, handsome face, smooth brown skin, and dark hair. She noted that his hair was styled and his nails manicured. "I've read about it." Once owned by a famous emperor of the Mughal Empire, it was perfectly formed, the etched blade an elegant curve with a sturdy hilt. A weapon made to be used. "I've always dreamed of seeing it, or using it."
"You fight with blades?"
Morgan asked. She smiled. I like fighting of all descriptions. She pointed to the dagger, but seeing something like that is pretty amazing. His gaze sharpened on her, sliding down her body.
I like rare things.
McCade took a step closer to Blair, their arms brushing.
Mr. Morgan, I'm Detective Luke McCade with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police. This is my colleague, Blair Mason.
He held up his badge. Morgan's gaze cooled.
Salvador Morgan. I'm always happy to help Las Vegas's hard-working law enforcement.
Luke reached into his pocket and pulled out a photo of Kazan from the security footage.
Do you know this man?
There was a flicker of something on Morgan's face, then it was gone. Blair felt the urge to drum her fingers, but kept watching him.
Yes, Anthony Kazan. He's been in my employ for over 6 years. I'm afraid I haven't seen him for several days. What was he doing for you?
McCade asked.
Tony is a jack of all trades. He was working on a lot of jobs for me.
Something to do with the cursed swords of Muramasa? Blair asked. She saw annoyance cross McCade's face. But time was ticking and she wasn't going to waste time tiptoeing around with Morgan. Salvador Morgan leaned back against his desk.
I've heard the legends about Muramasa and his swords. They are beautiful blades, and very valuable.
Blair wandered closer to a display of swords on the wall. She reached out, her finger trailing over the hilt of what she knew was a Viking sword. She noticed Morgan watching her, his gaze on her fingers. She saw the flash of interest. Creep. He was watching her like he might watch an interesting weapon he wanted to possess. They are very valuable. She turned. And would be a nice addition to your collection.
There are lots of things I'd like to collect,
he drawled.
But yes, I would love a Muramasa sword in my collection, preferably 2.
Ugh. After this, she was going to need to take a shower. She felt a throb of something from beside her and turned her head. Anger was written all over Luke's face.
I have no idea where Tony is, Morgan said. But if you find him, I'd like to know. He has some things that belong to me.
The man was ballsy, practically admitting that he'd organized the theft of the swords. But gut speculation wasn't enough for them to do anything about it.
Thank you for your time.
McCade gripped Blair's arm and yanked her out of the office. They didn't talk until they were outside the man's mansion. That's one guy who's taken the cliché of rich dude to the extreme, she said. McCade yanked open the door of his Explorer and then stomped around to slide into the driver's seat. Well, someone wasn't happy. I just moved things along, McCade. I didn't want to spend all day in there. A muscle ticked in his jaw and he started the SUV. Guy has some balls admitting to stealing the swords, she added.
And I will damn well find a way to prove it and charge the bastard.
McCade's words came out like bullets.
We'll stop by Kazan's house. Baxter checked it out and said the guy wasn't there, but I have a search warrant now.
His tone was ruthlessly contained. Blair pulled a granola bar out of her pocket, opened it, and started munching. Morgan organized for the swords to be stolen and sent his man Kazan to do the job.
Kazan took the swords, instigating a massacre to hide the deed.
Blair nodded. Then he went to the Waldorf Astoria, I assumed to hand the swords over to Morgan, but something went wrong.
And now Kazan is on the loose with 2 cursed katanas.
McCade's tone vibrated with frustration. You going to tell me why you're so pissed? Is it because I got straight to the point with Morgan?
No.
His hands flexed on the wheel. Because he taunted us, and you can't arrest his ass right now?
No, I didn't enjoy watching that asshole drool all over you.
She paused, the granola bar frozen in the air. She sucked in a quick breath and felt flickers of heat in places she wouldn't admit to. She kept her tone light. Can't say I particularly enjoyed it either. That earned her a grunt. You turning all possessive on me, McCade? He shot her a hot look.
Looks that way.
Blair fought not to shift in her seat. How could that make her both annoyed, nervous, and a little turned on? It wasn't long before McCade pulled up in front of a small house in Whitney, in the eastern part of Las Vegas. The house was nondescript with a single garage, cracked driveway, and untended yard. No one answered their knock, and Blair peeked in the window. No one was inside the sparse living room. McCade knocked several more times, but no one came to the door. It didn't take a detective badge to work out that the place was empty. They walked around the back. McCade went straight to the back door, lifted his boot, and kicked the door in. She gasped. "Detective, I don't think that's by the book."
It's you who's always telling me that sometimes we have to step outside our comfort zone to get the job done, to save lives.
She held up a hand. "Hang on, I need a moment to appreciate this." He cocked his head.
Don't be a smartass.
So the great Detective McCade is finally listening to me?
Shut it, Mason.
He walked past her and entered the house. She followed him in. They walked through the 3-bedroom house. It had an air of disuse. She noted unwashed dishes in the kitchen sink and empty beer bottles beside the couch. "He's not here," she said. Kazan had a guest room and a junk room/office, neither of which were hiding the man or any katanas. When they approached the master bedroom, Blair instantly spotted the shuriken embedded in the door. "McCade." They both stared at it for a second. McCade drew his Glock and they cautiously peered into the bedroom. Blair sucked in a breath. Japanese writing in red paint was scrawled everywhere on the wall behind the unmade queen-size bed.
Hell.
McCade lowered his weapon.
You know any Japanese?
No. Blair stared at the text. But I'm pretty sure it doesn't say happy birthday or I love you. Luke led Blair back to his Explorer. The crime scene techs were still busy photographing the Japanese writing at Kazan's place, and the shuriken had been taken into evidence. He knew they wouldn't find any fingerprints, just like the one from Blair's apartment. He'd already made some calls and they had a translator on standby. Blair had also sent pictures through to Brooks. But Luke wasn't seeing the Japanese symbols. Instead, he kept seeing Salvador Morgan slobbering all over Blair. Shit. He should have his head in the game. He blew out a breath. Blair slid into the seat beside him and fidgeted. He knew what that meant. He reached into his glove compartment and pulled out a candy bar he'd stashed there earlier. Lucky it was winter, or it would have been melted goo by now. He handed it over to her. "McCade, I think I love you." She tore it open and bit in. Then she moaned. He felt that throaty sound around his cock. Damn. He shifted in his seat and pulled away from the curb. The possessive feelings rattling around inside him were making him twitchy. When he dated a woman, he considered her his for the time they were together, but he'd never felt this all-consuming need to stake his claim on a woman. Being around Blair was leaving him with a constant erection and heat in his gut. She was driving him crazy.
I got another call while you were talking to the tech guys.
Focusing on their work was the best distraction.
Another dealer with a tip on the katanas.
She turned to look at him, licking chocolate off her fingers. Luke fought back a groan. "Do you think that means we'll get attacked by a samurai again?" Her eyes narrowed. "I wouldn't be disappointed if we did." So damn bloodthirsty.
We'll keep an eye out this time and hopefully avoid any sword-wielding maniacs.
He pulled onto the interstate heading north.
I don't think Morgan is leaving shurikens and Japanese writings around Las Vegas.
Nope, we have another player. Damn it.
Lachlan have anything?
She shook her head. Then she leaned forward, staring out the side mirror. We have company. Luke glanced in the rearview mirror. He saw 5 black motorcycles whizzing through the traffic, gaining on them. Another appeared. No, make that 6. He cursed. Shit. Blair turned in her seat. I had 3 black bikes following me on the way to the station this morning. They disappeared, so I thought it was nothing. The bikes were gaining.
Hang on.
Luke sped up and the Explorer shot forward. The traffic wasn't too thick, but he didn't want to risk innocent lives. His jaw locked. The motorcycles broke into 2 lines of 3 and flanked their SUV. Luke looked out his side window and saw the lead rider pull a handgun.
Fuck, get down!
Bullets thudded on metal. Luke slammed his foot down and swerved the vehicle. He clipped the bike and the rider almost fell. The bike dropped back.
Lachlan?
Blair had her phone to her ear. "We need you guys. Now. We're on the I-515 being pursued by attackers on motorcycles."
Yep.
Okay. She shoved the phone away. "My team is on the way." Luke changed lanes, moving around a small truck.
People are going to get hurt.
"We'll try not to let that happen." She was looking out her side window. A bike roared up beside them, the rider's face obscured by a black helmet. Suddenly, Blair opened her door, ramming it into the bike. With a screech of tires, the bike wobbled and the rider flew off. She slammed the door closed and grinned. 1 down, 5 to go. The other 5 bikes zoomed ahead of them. Luke saw them cut in front of a car. Shit. The car swerved, slowed, then crashed into the concrete divider in the center of the road. "Stay focused, McCade. We'll get them help, but we need to stop these bastards first." He gripped the wheel and watched Blair draw her cig.
Blair?
She opened her window. "Hold us steady." She climbed out the window, her entire upper body outside the car. Damn it, she was so damn fearless. Bam, bam, bam. He kept the Explorer steady as she fired on the bikes. He saw one motorcycle tip, sliding sideways across the road. Ahead, he saw a silver minivan come into view. Oh, hell.
Blair?
The bikes flanked the minivan, blocking the lanes. Luke slowed down. More bullets hit the Explorer, cracking the windshield.
Blair!
She ducked back inside. Fuckers. All of a sudden, the minivan veered to the right, clipped a bike, then hit the concrete barricade. It flipped, rolled, then stopped on its roof. Shit, Blair muttered. Luke jerked on the brakes and the Explorer skidded to a stop. Luke pulled his Glock and Blair already had her door open, firing her weapon. The bike spun around, converging on Blair and Luke. Bullets hit in a barrage and Luke ducked down, saw Blair doing the same. Shit, they were pinned and he couldn't get to the minivan to check on whoever was inside. Then he heard the roar of engines. Blair turned her head, then grinned. Perfect timing. 2 black SUVs sped in from behind. They roared past them. One SUV ran straight into one bike, sending the rider spinning into the air. The other SUV's tires screeched as the driver executed a perfect 180-degree turn. Both vehicles stopped and the doors opened. Big bodies exited, all wearing black body armor and holding high-tech assault rifles. Team 52 had arrived. Gunfire exploded around them. Blair dived back through the Explorer, climbing out on Luke's side. "My team can handle this." He nodded, grabbed her hand, and together they crouched and sprinted toward the overturned minivan. As they approached, he heard a woman's sobbing screams and a baby crying. Shit. Blair rounded the vehicle. Luke saw the woman in the driver's seat, hanging upside down and held in place by her seatbelt. Her face was bleeding.
"Ma'am, I'm with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police. We're going to get you out."
"Thank God, my baby. She's crying."
"Blair?"
Luke said. Blair blinked, then crouched down. She tugged on the bent back door, yanking until the metal groaned and the door opened. Baby looks okay. No injuries." She's scared," the mother said. "I'll get her." Blair met Luke's gaze. "You get the mother out." Luke reached in, checking the woman over.
"Anything hurt?"
She pulled in a shuddering breath. "Just the nicks on my face from when the glass shattered." It took him some time, but soon he unclipped her belt and guided her out. Just as he helped her stand, he heard sirens. Several cruisers and an ambulance pulled up.
"Everyone okay?"
Lachlan strode over, his rifle on his shoulder. Just beyond him, the rest of Team 52 was standing around the black-clad riders. 2 were kneeling, but the rest were laid out flat, probably no longer breathing.
"Yeah,"
Luke answered. 2 paramedics rushed over to help the woman. After he'd handed her off, he turned, his gaze falling on Blair. He froze. She was awkwardly holding a chubby little girl who looked just shy of about 1. The baby was sucking her thumb and Blair had her up against her chest. Can we give her back to her mom?" Blair asked. The little girl pressed her face to Blair's neck, seemingly content where she was. Blair's uncomfortable look turned panicked.
"Mother's getting checked out."
Luke worked hard to keep his smile off his face. "Then you take her."
"She looks happy where she is."
Lachlan coughed, but Luke was sure the man was trying not to laugh. Blair glared daggers at her boss. "Someone take her," Blair said. Lachlan smiled.
"You look cute with a baby in your arms, Blair."
Taking pity on her, Luke moved closer. He stroked a finger down the girl's plump cheek.
"She's fine. You're doing great."
"I know nothing about kids."
"You comforted her. And Lachlan's right, you guys look cute."
Blair snorted. "Yeah, right."
"You don't want kids one day?"
She blinked. "I work for a covert black ops team and like kicking butt. I don't have time to think about kids." She looked down at the girl and her voice lowered. "They're so fragile. They break so easily." Luke heard something in her voice.
"Blair?"
She shook her head and shoved the girl at him. "Here, get her back to her mom." He watched her another beat before he carried the girl back over to her mother. After a quick check-in with the police on scene, he headed back to Team 52.
"Thanks for the help,"
he said. Lachlan nodded.
"Anytime."
"You can't even blame them for all the mess," Blair said. No, Luke had gotten a taste of exactly the kinds of situations the team faced.
"We're going to get out of here."
Lachlan lifted a hand to the others and they headed back to their SUVs.
"Keep me updated."
"So," Blair dusted off her jeans, "we still going to meet that dealer?"
"Yeah."
They walked back to his Explorer. She eyed the side of it. The bullet holes add a little something to the paint job. He scowled. It meant he had to fill out a bunch of paperwork.
"Get in."
"You got any more snacks?" He settled in the driver's seat.
"You should be a lot bigger than you are."
"I burn it off." He shook his head.
"Let's go, Cupcake. I'll get you a snack on the way."
Chapter 8. Luke turned off the strip and into Caesar's Palace. He parked at the front entrance, flipping his LVMPD parking badge on the dash. Blair looked at the casino and the cluster of Christmas trees all coated in artificial snow at the entrance and raised a brow.
"The dealer lives here," Luke told her. "He plays here constantly. Does most of his sales from a blackjack table."
They went inside. The opulent lobby had an ornate ceiling and a large, statue-topped fountain in the center of it. The place dripped in more Christmas decorations. Luke headed for the entrance to the high rollers area. They bypassed the busy casino area, and after he'd flashed his badge, a dealer led them back to the high rollers room. It was even more gaudy than the other parts of the casino. Luke spotted a lone man sitting at a table with a female dealer.
"Remington."
The man looked up. He was movie star handsome and looked like he could have stepped out of the pages of GQ. Blonde hair fell over his forehead and his blue polo shirt covered a lean chest. Blair let out a low whistle that set Luke's teeth on edge.
"McCade, good to see you."
The man's bright green eyes fell on Blair.
"Looks like you traded up when it came to partners."
"Careful, she bites,"
Luke said.
"I might like that,"
Remington drawled. Blair smiled, showing lots of teeth. "Shame I don't play with pretty boys." The art dealer grinned, but Luke kept his face blank, and when Remington looked back at him, the man coughed and straightened.
"Remington Blair Mason, Blair Remington."
She arched a brow. "No last name?"
"No."
Another movie star smile.
"I like to be unique and mysterious."
Luke snorted.
"He was born Aaron Smithson and changed it when he started dealing in art."
Remington's smile dissolved. Spoil sport. It's a pleasure, Blair.
You called me about some Japanese swords?
Luke said. Right. I got wind that Salvador Morgan organized the theft of the swords you've been asking about from some casino exhibit.
We already know that,
Luke said. Blair crossed her arms. We visited his Playboy mansion this morning. Remington shook his head. That man has no class, unlike me, sweet Blair. He ran the edge of his cards on the table. I could show you a good time. Luke felt his blood pressure spike. He was getting pretty damn fed up with men fawning over Blair. He gritted his teeth. He wanted to punch Remington in his perfect nose. And I could hurt you, Blair said silkily. Oh, the man said.
What else have you got?
Luke snapped. Something went wrong. Morgan was bragging about getting his hands on the swords, but his man went rogue.
Kazan?
Luke prompted. That's him. Apparently he stopped returning Morgan's calls and never checked in. Killed a bunch of Morgan's security guards. Luke nodded.
We saw the scene.
He also never delivered the swords. Blair tapped her chin with a fingertip. You think Kazan decided to cash in and sell the swords? It doesn't sound like him, Remington mused. Don't know him well, but from my interactions with Kazan, he's always been loyal to Morgan. Luke scribbled some notes, then snapped his notepad shut.
Thanks, Remington. You hear anything else, call me.
The art dealer inclined his head, then looked at Blair. Blair, if you're looking for a good time, give me a call. She waved. Don't wait up. Blair and Luke strode out of the high rollers room. They strode back down the carpeted hall, headed for the main casino. He felt Blair watching him. What's got you all worked up now? She asked. You are incredibly moody, you know that? When you're pissed, it throbs off you. He felt like she was waving a red flag in front of his face. He jerked to a stop and spun.
Watching you flirt. It's burned on my damn eyeballs.
She put a hand on one hip. I wasn't flirting. Remington was. And besides, even if I was, it's none of your goddamn business. Luke backed her into the wall and she pressed her hands against his chest. Back off, McCade.
I don't think you want me to.
He certainly didn't want to. He pinned her, his mouth hovering over hers.
Watching these men drool all over you, it pisses me off.
She shoved. McCade! He held his ground.
Watching you talk, move, fight, eat, breathe, that turns me on.
She stilled, her gaze locking with his. He lowered his voice.
It's driving me out of my mind.
He knew he was being crazy and possessive. He was sure she was about to punch him in the head. Then he saw it. The light of hunger in her eyes. He slammed his mouth on hers. She moaned, her tongue delving between his lips. Their tongues dueled, and he wrapped his arms around her, pushing her firmly against the wall. God, he could kiss her all day, all week. The slick slide of her tongue, the taste of her, the small sounds she made. She wrapped a long leg around his hip, and his denim-covered cock hit between her thighs. What the hell was he doing? He was kissing Blair Mason in the middle of a corridor in Caesar's palace. They were probably putting on a hell of a show for security. Luke yanked himself back, fighting for some control.
We need to get back to the station.
She stared at him. McCade. Her hands smoothed over his shoulders. Damn, you're tense. Her fingers kneaded.
What are you doing?
Her eyes met his. Being nice to you. Just be quiet and accept it. He blew out a breath.
Blair Mason being nice to me. I'll mark this date on my calendar.
She poked her tongue out, then her face turned serious. I have no interest in smarmy rich guys or pretty boy art dealers. Luke stilled.
What do you have an interest in?
Well, I like hard bodies. Her fingers dug deeper into his shoulders. And a guy who can take care of himself. and it appears I have an interest in annoying police detectives." He brushed his lips against hers.
"I wish we didn't need to get back to headquarters right now."
She patted his shoulder and stepped back. "But duty calls." Blair wasn't afraid to admit to herself that she was pretty damn confused right now. And all these confused, messed up feelings revolved around the man walking beside her. They marched into police headquarters and Blair battled the urge to grab him and drag him into a dark corner. How dare he kiss the hell out of her and leave her all worked up? Right now she was fighting the urge to tear his clothes off. Desire was a traitorous curl in her belly. She wanted to see all the bronze skin she knew was hiding under the denim and the shirt. Her gaze fell to where he'd rolled the sleeves of his shirt up, uncovering the sexiest forearms she'd ever seen. Damn, the man was scrambling her brain. She licked her lips and almost moaned. She could still taste him, coffee and mint. She could still feel the heat of his big body pressed up against hers. He was tall and strong, and she knew he could match her. Her pulse spiked, and she licked her lips again. She liked far too many things about Detective Luke McCade. As soon as they reached the homicide section, McCade glanced her way.
"I need to update my lieutenant."
She nodded.
"Stay out of trouble."
She tilted her head. "I'm in a police station."
"Don't break anyone's nose or arm or get into a shootout."
Without saying anything else, he strode away on those long legs. Blair rolled her eyes to the ceiling, mostly so she didn't watch his denim-cupped ass as he walked away. God, she needed something to eat. She walked toward McCade's desk. She should just bang him and get him out of her system. With every other guy she'd felt an interest in, it faded pretty fast after a few sweaty nights. But the niggle in her gut warned her that she was playing with fire when it came to McCade. Trying to find other ways to distract herself, she pulled her phone out to check in with Lachlan. She sent off a quick message and got a typical brusque Lachlan reply. No updates. She plopped down on McCade's chair and took a second to adjust it to suit her, thereby screwing up all his settings. Petty, but it made her feel better. Next, she rifled through his drawers. She didn't find a single candy bar or anything else edible. She looked over and saw Baxter sitting at the neighboring desk. He was smiling at her. "He hates when people mess with his chair," Baxter said. Blair smiled. "Good." The detective nodded. "He needs someone who pushes his buttons and doesn't let him get his own way." She wasn't exactly sure what to make of that. "He usually dates these nice women who all smile and nod at him." Blair scowled. She didn't want to imagine some nice, boring woman in floral blouses and pearls fluttering her eyelashes at McCade. "We aren't dating, Baxter." Baxter made an unconvinced sound. Her gaze snagged on the muffins sitting on the corner of Baxter's desk. "I need that muffin." He frowned at her. "The way you eat, you should weigh more." "Good metabolism." The detective grabbed the muffin and broke it in half. He handed her a piece, and they both sat there nibbling. "I take it you didn't find any leads on the swords?" he asked. She shook her head. "He did get chased by a bike gang." She gave him a quick recap. "We'll find him. Worked with Luke a long time, and he's like a Rottweiler with a bone on a case. Big or small, he gives every case his all. I think it's because of his mom." Blair paused. "His mom?" Baxter nodded. "She was killed when he was a teenager." The muffin felt like it turned to rock in her belly. God, that's rough. She knew exactly what happened when you lost a part of your family. It crumbled. "She was murdered," Baxter continued. Jesus. Luke had lost his mom in the most horrible way possible. His dad was a cop, and it had something to do with a case he was working. Luke's the oldest, and he stepped up to help his dad with his younger siblings. Responsible, protective Luke McCade. Blair rubbed the ache in her chest. Just then they heard a commotion out in the hall. Sharing a curious glance, she and Baxter rose together, walking out of homicide. A group of people were clustered near the stairwell.
What's going on? Baxter asked.
Something's happening down in the lobby, one woman said. Frowning, Blair took the stairs. Baxter followed, huffing a bit by the time they reached the bottom. As they entered the lobby with its sea of waiting chairs, she saw lots of frightened faces. She turned and spotted a man striding through the rows of chairs, holding a katana. Fuck. All around, cops drew their weapons. Beside her, Baxter also pulled out his handgun.
Drop the weapon,
a cop yelled out. The man raised the sword above his head. Blair sucked in a breath. That looked like a no. Then the man spun. Like a whirlwind, he tore towards several uniforms. He cut one down, the man screaming as his blood spurted from a slice across his belly. Screams filled the lobby. Blair's heart pounded in her ears. There were too many people in the room. Cops, innocent civilians, handcuffed perps waiting to be processed. The cops opened fire. The noise in the enclosed space was deafening. Blair braced, watching the man with the sword. His body jerked under the impact of the bullets, but they didn't stop him. He had a Muramasa blade. He didn't drop the sword, and he didn't slow down. "Cease fire!" she yelled. Baxter looked at her for a beat, then bellowed with her. "Cease fire!" The man raced across the lobby, cutting into several women who were clearly still wearing their sexy little dresses from the night before. Screams reverberated off the walls. Blair rushed forward. "Hey, you!" The man's head lifted. His eyes were bloodshot, his face contorted. Several cops moved forward and she held up a hand. "Stop." She lowered her voice. "Baxter, make sure I don't get shot." Blair leaped over a row of plastic chairs. She charged the man, jumping and aiming a kick at the attacker's head. She connected with his jaw and his head snapped back. She landed, bending into a crouch. He moved fast, slashing with that sword. It cut through the air in a blur. She ducked, and then when he rushed her, she leaped backward, dodging that deadly blade. Baxter rushed forward, gun aimed. "Drop the sword!" "Baxter, stay back!" Blair raced in from the side. She landed a hard kick to the man's lower back. He staggered forward, recovered quickly, and slashed out with the sword. But he didn't come at Blair. He lunged at Baxter. The sword ran straight through Baxter's gut. Everything stopped. Blair felt like she was moving in slow motion, the sound in the room turning into a loud drone. No. Blood trickled out of Baxter's mouth. He clutched his bleeding belly. Baxter, who had a sweet, lopsided smile and who had shared his muffin with her. The attacker yanked the katana back and Baxter collapsed like a puppet who'd had its strings cut. No! Blair swiveled, her hands clenching into fists. With a roar, she rushed at the man. The lieutenant looked at Luke unhappily.
You need to speed up the search, Luke. I know it doesn't look like we've got much, but we're working on it. And Mason's helping you?
He nodded.
We're sharing intel and working together.
Luke decided to avoid telling his lieutenant the part where he'd had his tongue down Blair's throat about 30 minutes earlier. Suddenly they heard distant screams. They both leaped to their feet. Luke shouldered out of the doorway, racing towards the stairwell. The lieutenant was still in good shape and he kept pace with Luke. Their boots thundered as they raced down the stairs, running into several others. They burst out into the lobby. His gut tightened. Blair was fighting a man dressed in black and wielding a katana. Shit. Luke instantly went for his weapon. His hands clenched on the Glock, aiming it. As he moved closer, past huddled groups of frightened people in the rows of chairs, he heard a pained groan. He circled some chairs and his heart rammed hard against his ribs. Fuck. Baxter was on his knees on the ground, hands pressed to his gut, bleeding profusely. No.
Lieutenant?
The lieutenant nodded, his face turning to stone. He hunched over and ran toward the wounded detective. The lieutenant gripped the man under his armpits and pulled him away from the fight.
I need help here. Everyone else get back.
The lieutenant shouted, startling some bystanders who had been frozen with shock.
All of you move!
Luke turned his attention back to Blair. She was relentlessly kicking, hitting, and dodging the deadly whirl of the blade. Then he saw the attacker drive her backward. Her hip caught the edge of a row of chairs and she stumbled. The blade cut across her shoulder. She cursed and blood bloomed on her shirt. Hell no! Possessive rage rolled up inside Luke. He wasn't going to let this bastard hurt her. But he could see the man was already riddled with bullets, and like Byron Fuller, it hadn't slowed him down. Luke saw a uniform standing nearby, watching with terror in his eyes. Luke strode to him and yanked the man's baton off his belt. Hey! Ignoring him, Luke strode toward the fight. Blair saw him. McCade, stay back! The attacker rushed at her, the sword a blurry streak. She moved to evade, and Luke darted in. He slammed the baton hard against the man's arm. The attacker whirled, his bloodshot gaze falling on Luke. Can't fight it, the man rasped. Then the man came at Luke like a dervish. Fuck! Luke skirted some chairs, moving backward. Blood, the man said. I didn't realize. Tried to stop, but it wants blood. Blair leaped onto a row of chairs, running along them. She gained speed and leaped, sailing through the air. Shit, she was going to get herself skewered on that damn sword. She jumped onto the attacker's back, clamping onto him. The man jolted, and then she hammered her fist into his arm. He dropped the sword. But then the man reached back, grabbed a fistful of Blair's shirt, and yanked her over his head. She flew through the air, and Luke darted forward. He caught her against his chest, and they both went down, skidding across the floor. Blood! The word reverberated through the lobby. They both swiveled and watched the man snatch up the katana again. But this time he held the sword low, with the blade pointed straight up. With a blood-curdling cry, the man fell forward, the sword spearing through his gut. Chapter 9. Blair leaned against the wall in the hospital waiting room. She hated hospitals. She hated the sharp stench of antiseptic and the faint air of desperate hope and despair. They were awaiting news on Baxter. The detective had been taken into surgery, his wound critical. There were cops packed into the waiting room, some in khaki uniforms and others in plainclothes. A sobbing older woman she now knew was Baxter's wife sat flanked by the lieutenant and her teenage kids. They'd already all been rocked by the loss of the SWAT team. No one wanted to lose another police officer. Luke was pacing nearby, his hair mussed from running his hands through it, and his face set like stone. He'd been wearing a groove in the linoleum for the last hour. After they'd arrived, he'd bullied her into getting her shoulder treated. She was now the proud owner of 10 more stitches. She tried to get them just to bandage it, but Luke had threatened to hold her down. The 3 in her bicep hadn't bothered her, but these new ones throbbed. Thankfully, the nurse had given her some painkillers, and although she'd never admit it, she'd held Luke's hand while they'd done the stitching. The cursed katana was back at police headquarters, wrapped in a blanket and under guard. The man with the sword had come to police headquarters to make a scene and cause a mess. Maybe make the police look incompetent? Who the hell was he? Shit, they just had so many pieces that didn't fit together. She watched Luke do a few more laps of the waiting room. Damn, she couldn't handle it anymore. She couldn't handle the despair she saw lurking in his eyes. She walked over to him. Sensing her, he stopped, watching her come, his arms hanging at his sides. She moved straight to his chest, pressing her face against hard pecs. His scent enveloped her, and she wrapped her arms around him. For a second, he didn't move. Then his arms clamped around her. "You're staying with me at my place," he said. "I'm not letting you out of my sight." She felt his big body vibrate. "Luke, I need this. Please?" She sighed. "Okay." His fingers flexed on her, and he buried his face in her hair. She wasn't sure how long they stood there like that, waiting, just holding each other for support. It wasn't often that she had to provide someone with comfort, and it felt somehow right. A door opened nearby, and Luke lifted his head. They both turned and saw an older doctor in scrubs enter the room.
I understand you're all here for Detective Baxter.
Baxter's wife rose shakily. How is he?
Surgery was successful. We won't know more until tomorrow, but so far things are looking promising.
The air shuddered out of Luke, and Blair held him tighter. Baxter's wife lifted her hands to her face and burst into tears. Her kids leaned into her. All around, cops broke out in relieved smiles, some clapping each other on the back. But Blair read between the lines of what the doctor had said. Baxter wasn't out of danger yet. She wasn't entirely certain that they expected him to survive the night. Her phone rang, and murmuring an apology to Luke, she pulled it out. It's Lachlan. Luke nodded, and she turned away. Hey.
Update?
Lachlan asked. Detective Baxter made it through surgery.
You know who the attacker is yet?
No. It wasn't Kazan, though.
Okay, I need you to come to base. Ty's got something.
She closed her eyes. Okay.
And bring the sword.
Will do. Suddenly, a shadow loomed over her. She looked up into McCade's stony face. Lachlan wants me at base.
I'm coming,
Luke said. She stared at him for a beat, then spoke into the phone. McCade's coming with me.
Acknowledged,
Lachlan replied.
See you when you get here.
They made the drive to police headquarters in silence. They retrieved the katana, placing it in the back of Luke's Explorer. From there, it was a quick drive to the bunker. Luke was quiet the entire way. Kinsey was waiting for them. Her smile was missing. I'm sorry to hear about your detective. Luke just nodded. He held the wrapped katana in his hands like it was a bomb.
He made it through surgery, and he's tough.
The X-8 fueled? Blair asked. The blonde nodded. All ready for you. She patted Blair's arm. Have a good flight. Blair pushed through the door to the hangar that sat adjacent to the bunker. McCade followed her, and she heard his steps slow.
Shit,
he muttered.
What the hell is that?
She led him over to the jet copter. Its gray exterior gleamed dully in the lights. An experimental jet-powered helicopter. It's called the X-8. Better range than a helicopter and the speed of a plane. He ducked his head as they climbed aboard the aircraft.
Where's the pilot?
He asked. That would be me. He raised his eyebrows.
You fly?
She nodded. Seth and I are the team's pilots. I love flying this baby. But instead of moving to the cockpit, she moved to the back of the X-8. She opened a sturdy black metal case, locked into place on the floor. Containment box, she said. He carefully set the wrapped sword inside, and Blair locked it securely. Then she led him to the cockpit. She slid into the pilot seat, and McCade moved into the seat beside her, adjusting it for his long legs. Blair settled a headset over her head and ran through the pre-start checks. She checked in with air traffic control. Soon they rolled out of the hangar, then lifted off straight up like a helicopter. It wasn't long before they were soaring out over the desert. It's only a short ride to base, she told him. Clearly lost in thought, McCade nodded and looked out the window. She knew he was thinking of his injured friend. Blair understood. She'd lost her closest girlfriend in a training exercise soon after joining the Marines. Beth had been a badass with a wicked sense of humor. Blair had also watched a lot of good Marines die in battle. Some she'd watched die right before her eyes. She lifted a hand, rubbing the corner of her prosthetic eye. She'd even watched Lachlan nearly bleed out on a mission gone so fucking wrong. She remembered the searing pain of shrapnel in her eye, trying to staunch the blood flow from his mangled arm. She dragged him to the evac point by sheer will alone. Suddenly, Area 52's air traffic controller's voice came through her headset. She shook her head. They had arrived.
She descended, and soon they swept in to land in front of a large hangar. "Welcome to Area 52. McCade stared out the window. Curiosity had softened some of the tense lines on his face. "I finally get to see your Batcave." She laughed and rose. After opening the X8 side door, she grabbed one end of the containment box and he grabbed the other. She led him into the hangar, nodding at the black-clad guards mixed in with Air Force personnel. They maneuvered the containment box into a large elevator covered in matte black metal, and she stabbed a button on the panel. They zoomed downward. A long way downward. She watched McCade absorbing it all. Then the doors opened. "Welcome to our home away from home." She led him inside and they set the box down. "Ty will grab that." She pointed to a nearby set of floor-to-ceiling reinforced sliding doors. "That's our storage facility for all the artifacts that are too dangerous to be left unsecured." The doors to the facility were open, and when he looked inside, he sucked in a breath. "That's all dangerous artifacts?" "Yep." She knew he was staring at the rows and rows of shelving covered in black containers like the one they were carrying. She led him in the opposite direction, toward the main work area for the team. Lachlan was walking down the corridor, flanked by Callie and Natalie. Lachlan waved 2 fingers at her. "Blair!" Callie moved to gently hug her, her gaze going to her bandaged shoulder. "I'm fine, only 10 stitches. "Plus your original 3, McCade said. She sighed. "Fine, 13 stitches. Nat pressed a hand to her other arm. "I know you hate stitches. Can we quit talking about them?" Nat smiled. "Glad you're okay. We've been missing you." The archaeologist eyed McCade with frank speculation. "McCade, this is Dr. Natalie Blackwell, Team 52's archaeologist." "Nice to meet you," McCade said. "Likewise. Always interested to meet someone who drives Blair crazy." Blair groaned. "Ignore her. She's Australian." "Hey!" Nat slapped Blair's uninjured right shoulder. Then Blair spotted movement on the hall. She turned to watch the big boss striding toward them. She sensed McCade stiffen slightly. Director Jonah Grayson was very easy on the eyes. He was tall and lean, with black hair and emerald green eyes. He clearly had some Native American heritage, and it showed in his bronze skin and high cheekbones. Blair had never seen a man wear a suit as well as he did. "Detective McCade, it's a pleasure to meet you in person." Jonah offered McCade a hand. "We appreciate all the work you do for us and the team." McCade nodded, shooting Blair a glance. She pulled a face. "I'd say it's a pleasure, Director Grayson," McCade said, "but I'd be lying." Jonah smiled, his white teeth bright against his burnished skin. "Well, we appreciate it nonetheless." McCade looked at Blair again. "That said, I'm beginning to see the importance of the job your team does." Blair felt a burst of surprise and something else in her chest. Jonah inclined his head. "I'm happy to hear that." The director's green gaze fell on Blair. "Now, Ty is waiting for you." Luke followed Blair, Lachlan, and the other women as they led him down another corridor. He took note of the high-tech lighting system. Even though they were deep underground with no windows, the lighting mimicked natural light. He glanced through several plate glass windows at labs and offices. The place was impressive. He still couldn't believe the huge storage area he'd seen and all the boxes stacked inside. A part of him hadn't appreciated just how important Team 52's job was. But these last few days, seeing the damage that the cursed katanas had done, up close and personal, was hammering that fact home. He looked at the back of Blair's head, her blonde ponytail swinging. She risked her life to do her job, and she did it without hesitation. Suddenly, a door opened and an older man with a stocky body covered in black fatigues, hair cut military short, and faded blue eyes stepped out. Those eyes zeroed in on Luke, and he felt the faint need to reach for his weapon. Hey, Arlo, Blair said. The man made a harumphing sound.
Heard you had to get stitches.
Blair rolled her eyes. Shit, can we stop talking about stitches?
How many?
He snapped. 10, she snapped back.
13,
Luke corrected. That grizzled face swung his way again.
You the cop putting her in the line of fire?
Blair shoved her hands on her hips, looking peeved. Arlo, this is Detective Luke McCade. Luke Arlo Green. He takes care of the warehouse and is often a pain in the ass. Luke nodded.
I'm the cop who's watching Blair's back while she beats up bad guys.
Arlo snorted.
Girl does like beating people up.
Blair rolled her eyes. Nat laughed behind her hand, and Callie was grinning.
She's broken a nose, 2 arms, and taken down some sword-wielding maniacs in the last few days,
Luke said.
Good.
Arlo gave a nod.
No more stitches, Mason.
He swiveled on his boots and stomped off. Arlo is... Blair pondered for a second. Leather on the outside and a big softy underneath. Nat finished. Callie snorted.
I don't know him,
Luke said.
but I'm pretty sure you don't want to let him hear you say that.
The woman laughed, and shaking her head, Blair shouldered through a door. Luke stepped inside a lab. Ty, I bet you've been missing me, Blair called out. The huge African-American man working at the bench didn't even look up.
Yeah.
I'll have you know I've been nicked by a damn sword twice.
Unless you can't walk or your guts are falling out, I don't need to know about it.
The man turned then, a scowl on his face, and stroked his goatee. Despite his grumpy words, he did a sweep of Blair's body. There was nothing sexual about it, and Luke swore he saw a quick flash of relief. Blair made introductions, and Luke shook the scientist's hand. Then the rest of Team 52 arrived. Luke saw Seth, Axel, and Smith file in and line up against the wall. As Ty stepped forward, everyone focused on the scientist.
I've determined how the sword functions and how it affects the user.
Luke straightened.
Nanotechnology,
Ty said. Luke blinked. What the hell?
The swords are over 500 years old. How could nanotechnology have anything to do with this?
Ty held up a hand.
Just because earlier civilizations didn't actually understand the microscopic science of nanotechnology didn't mean our ancestors still didn't know enough to utilize it to change the properties of certain things.
He swiveled to a screen, and an old ornate cup appeared on it. It was a reddish color, and Luke thought it looked Greek or Roman.
This is the Lycurgus cup,
Ty said. Nat shifted. It's a 14th century Roman glass cage cup. It's made of glass, and parts of it have been cut back into designs depicting the mythical king Lycurgus. Another picture appeared, and Luke frowned.
The glass is a different color.
It now looked green. Ty nodded.
Glass changes color depending on the light shining on it. The glass was created with nanoparticles of gold and silver in it. Perhaps it was an accidental discovery, but the glassmakers, either willingly or by chance, used nanotechnology to create the effect.
Another picture appeared. It showed a close-up picture of a sword blade. It had a distinctive pattern on the steel that looked like water. Damascus steel, Nat said.
Ty nodded. Nat gets an A in this class. From about the 3rd century, bladesmiths in Damascus started forging Damascus steel. The blades were strong, resistant to shattering, and sharp. No one had seen swords like them at the time. And nanotechnology was responsible?
Luke asked. A nod.
They imported Wootz steel ingots from India to forge the Damascus steel. We still don't know exactly how Wootz was made, but about 10 years back, a research team discovered nanowires and carbon nanotubes in Damascus steel.
Everyone in the room shared some looks. Ty huffed out a breath.
Nanostructures in the steel that would account for the steel's exceptional qualities.
He paused.
The same thing applies for the Muramasa swords. Muramasa added something when he created the steel that he forged his blades from. Or more exactly, he added something to the steel beneath the hilt. I can't identify the exact substances, but it is certainly a nanomaterial. Nanotoxicity and nanomedicine are huge research areas. From what I can deduce, the nanomaterial in Muramasa's swords is absorbed through the skin at the hilt, but nanoparticles have strange and unique toxicity effects, unlike what we see in larger particles. They most certainly translocate from the site of absorption